Chapter 41. Hurry. 10 minutes later, Ethan set off again on the quest, accompanied by his dark crow and the so-called stupid beast. Clutching a dagger in one hand, he pressed deeper into the forest, comparing the landscape against the markers he'd sketched on his map. To recover the next quest item, he first had to find the path he'd marked, and quickly. Above him, the dark crow wheeled through the canopy, its sharp eyes scanning every shadow. Ethan's detection chip had a very limited range. In a hostile forest like this, it simply couldn't pick up threats fast enough. Better, then, to rely on living sentinels. Behind Ethan padded the beast, its pale fur rippling with an unearthly blue glow. Under Ethan's mental command, the creature moved almost as swiftly as he did, an essential improvement since their last near-fatal encounter with the Gotha duck. Back then, the crow had swooped in at the first sign of danger, cutting the duck's ambush short. But if a foe proved too powerful, the beast at Ethan's heels was there to hold the line. Ethan paused, raising a hand. The crow settled on a low branch, its head cocked as it listened. The beast crouched, nostrils flaring. Ethan's heart pounded. Every rustle, every whisper of wind could be an enemy drawing near. "Stay alert," he murmured. "We can't afford surprises." Reassured by their readiness, he stepped forward again, determined to retrace the overgrown trail and seize the next clue before time ran out. Ethan glanced at his two unusual companions, the dark raven, its glossy black wings beating the air in perfect sync with his thoughts, and the foolish beast, its wide eyes brimming with strange intelligence. Whenever an enemy slipped past the raven's defenses, the beast would seize that foe's mind in an instant. Then, working together, raven and beast would overwhelm even the most powerful elf warriors. And if the tide of battle ever turned against them, the beast's blink-fast teleportation could whisk the entire party to safety before a single arrow found its mark. Perhaps it was the lingering shock of yesterday's titanic clash between the Tyrannosaurus and Minos, but today's forest near the lake seemed eerily calm. Elves were few and far between, and Ethan hadn't encountered a single formidable opponent on the trail. Nearly an hour passed without so much as a rustle of hostile intent. With every step away from the waterfall, the mist in the air grew thinner, and then, almost imperceptibly, figures began to dart between the trees. Ethan consulted the holomap projected on his gauntlet. At their current pace, they'd be back on the marked road in another hour. He raised his blade and sliced through a tangle of thick vine, revealing the hidden beast's path beyond. Safe for now, he led the way deeper into the forest. Ethan stepped onto the beast path without a second thought. True, the chances of running into elves here were higher, but at least this trail was clear. It beat stumbling through tangled undergrowth any day. With both Dark Crow and the foolish beast watching his back, he had little to fear. Even if he couldn't win a straight-up fight, a quick retreat remained an option. Sure enough, it wasn't long before trouble found him. Whether it was a stroke of bad luck or simply the risk of traveling this route, a band of wild elves sprang out of the foliage and attacked. They were low-level fighters by all accounts, but it was one thing to face ordinary travelers and quite another to breach Ethan's doubled defenses. So long as Dark Crow's first-tier barrier held, no elf could get close enough to land a blow. In the dense forest, Dark Crow's power was unleashed like a dragon at sea. Over time, the creature's body had adapted to carrying Ethan's gear, and the extra weight only seemed to sharpen its speed. Even burdened with 10 pounds of equipment, Dark Crow now moved almost as swiftly as it had on their very first flight together. With the path secured and their enemies kept at bay, Ethan pressed forward, confident that no force in the forest could halt their journey. Then flitted like a shadow through the trees, effortlessly turning each would-be attacker into prey. Take, for example, the level 19 monkey fiend that tried to sneak up on him, banking on its light-and-quick reflexes to slip through the undergrowth. The instant its poisoned dart took flight, however, the Dark Crow, an ethereal raven, conjured by Ethan's flight system and amplified by his combat matrix, intercepted it. In a heartbeat, the bird's razor-sharp obsidian wings shredded the creature, killing it before it even registered what had happened. That single kill was mirrored again and again. From the moment the woodland elves decided to ambush Ethan, they sealed their own fates. No sooner did an arrow whistle through the glade than it was answered by the dark crow's claws, or the savage jaws of Ethan's summoned beast. In this forest, only the strongest survived, and any elf who lingered too long found themselves torn apart. Even when the elves pressed their attack in ever greater numbers, trying to overwhelm his flocks of dark crows, the beasts bent and deflected every assault with brutal precision. The sheer ruthlessness of his counterstrike sent a wave of terror rippling through the elven ranks. These hunters of the woods, masters of stealth and surprise, suddenly realized they were the hunted. None dared loose another arrow once they saw their comrades fall so decisively. One by one, the elves broke off and fled, unwilling to risk a single shot until they were safely beyond Ethan's reach. Ethan and his companions had barely crossed into the next territory when they found themselves under relentless attack from local elves. No hesitation, no mercy. Ever since the Gothaduck incident, both the Dark Crow and the Drowling Beast bore the elves' wrath on their backs. Any elf who drew a bow or raised a blade risked losing a hand or their life outright. The fallen elves were the only outlet for years of pent-up vengeance. With each elf they drove off, a darker aura seemed to settle over the Dark Crow and the Drowling Beast, the air around them growing stale and foul. It wasn't long before the elves, once eager for payback, began to hesitate. Fewer arrows flew their way, and the few shots that did came were half-hearted, as if fired at ghosts. What should have been an hour's march turned into nearly 2 hours of skirmishes around every bend. But despite the constant danger, the outcome was unmistakably positive. The Dark Crow had surged to level 18, its every strike more precise, its eldritch feathers crackling with newfound energy. The Drowling Beast, though it hadn't gained a level, had become astonishingly proficient under Ethan's guidance. Its movements were sharper, its instincts honed, and it responded to commands faster than ever. As the sun dipped low, the group finally pushed past the last ambush point. Exhausted but triumphant, they pressed on, ready for whatever lay ahead. Ethan paused at the edge of the trail, watching the hulking, sluggish beast stir in the clearing below. If it faced the Dark Raven again now, he knew it wouldn't be so easy to subdue. In just 2 hours, the creature's affinity for water had strengthened noticeably. Even more troubling, it had begun to learn its own fighting rhythm, anticipating and countering strikes with growing confidence. He let out a soft sigh. Fate had a strange way of circling back. Earlier, the Rada patrol had driven him headlong toward the waterfall, where he'd stumbled into this very creature, and by sheer will and the Dark Raven's power, brought it under control. Now he stood here again, ready to move on. "I finally made it back to this path," he murmured, offering himself a tired grin. "Time for a short break, then lunch, then we press on." Ethan scanned the forest floor and found a level clearing beneath a low-hanging pine. He gathered dead branches and crisp brown leaves, arranging them into a neat pile. With a few sparks of flint and steel, a modest flame flickered to life. Reaching into the hidden compartment of his rocket belt, he withdrew 2 freshly caught tea hairs along with a small tin of salt and pepper. Soon the scent of roasting meat drifted through the trees, a simple but well-earned meal before the next leg of his journey. Ethan worked with quiet precision. With his dagger in hand and the lumbering beast steadying the hairs, he expertly skinned them, removed their entrails, and rinsed the flesh under clear water. In only a few minutes, the 2 live hairs had been transformed into 4 perfect halves, each just waiting for the fire. He built a small grill of flat stones and piled on hot coals. As the slices of rabbit sizzled, their fat crackled and dripped, filling the camp with a mouth-watering aroma. Golden brown and crisp, the 4 halves emerged from the heat like small trophies. By the time Ethan set the roasted rabbit before himself, Dark Crow and the simple-minded beast, who'd been squabbling all morning over territory, had both drifted back to the clearing, drawn by the smell. Dark Crow, normally content with nothing but energy cubes, dipped his head in fascination. The beast's eyes gleamed as memories of Ethan's grilled fish flooded back. That first taste had been impossible to forget. Ethan couldn't help smiling at their anticipation. He cut 1 half for himself, savoring the tender meat. Then, placing another half gently into Dark Crow's iron bowl, he turned to the beast and offered the remaining 2 portions. The beast let out a happy grunt, and Dark Crow cawed appreciatively as the three of them settled down to feast. Ethan set down the saddlebags and surveyed their meager lunch. 2.5 roasted rabbits and a handful of energy cubes. The hulking beast at his side eyed the meal hungrily. It always ate more than his feathered companion, the Dark Crow. 2.5 rabbits were hardly enough to sate it. Scraps of tendon and half-bitten entrails usually ended up scattered along the trail. If it happened to spot some ripe forest fruit, the beast would even use its telekinetic gift to pluck off the pit and munch on it as it walked. "All right, dig in," Ethan said, dividing the rabbits between them. Neither the crow nor the beast moved until he gave the order. The moment he did, they fell upon the meat. The Dark Crow finished first, then glanced over at the beast's larger share. Without a word, it pecked at the neatly arranged energy cubes Ethan had set aside. The beast had been ready to offer the crow more rabbit, but the raven refused. After a brief, good-natured shrug, the beast let the crow have the cubes. Before long, their quick lunch was over. A few curious elves drifted by, nose in the air at the lingering perfume of roast meat, but when they spotted the intimidating pair of companions, a chill ran through them, and they hurried on their way instead of bothering the travelers. Ethan packed away the empty tins and bones. Pulling out his map, he confirmed their position. They were back on the main road, heading deeper into the forest toward their next waypoint. "All set? Let's move," he said, rolling up the parchment. With that, Ethan, the Dark Crow, and the beast resumed their march, ready for whatever lay ahead. Ethan estimated that, although the destination lay less than a day's ride away, they'd need 2 full days to get there safely. The further they went, the more and the stronger the elf patrols became. Better to travel slowly and cautiously than rush headlong into danger. After breaking for lunch and a brief rest, Dark Crow had fully recovered. Ethan mounted his bird once more, the dim-witted beast padding solemnly at his heels, and set off into the forest. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, and for a while the journey felt almost peaceful. Not long after Ethan and his companions vanished among the trees, a small band of figures appeared at the site of his old fire pit. Their leader, a tall, fair-skinned man, stepped forward. Unconcerned by the soot, he ran a slender hand through the gray ash, pressing it between his fingers. Then, curling it into a small heap, he brought it to his nose and inhaled. Behind him, his Av's soft murmurs. He turned his back to them, brows furrowed, and whispered almost to himself, "It can't be, Ethan." He watched the ashes slip through his fingers, and after a moment's hesitation, he placed a reassuring hand on the shoulder of the man next to him. "Well," he said, addressing Soros, "did you find anything?" Chapter 42. Discoveros's somber expression brightened at once, his face clearing into a warm, genuine smile. "It's nothing serious," he told his childhood friend. "I've actually run into someone even more dangerous." His friend's brow shot up. "Dangerous? You know who it is?" Soros nodded. "Out here on Trial Island, solo survivors are exceptionally rare. The island is vast. If a tester ventures into the forest, nearly all of them return within 24 hours. At this distance from our base, the chance of meeting anyone in the wild is practically zero. Surviving alone requires remarkable skill, and this particular individual, well, he's notorious." Leaning forward, his friend pressed him. "Notorious? So you've met him in person?" A grave smile played at Soros's lips. "You know him as well as anyone. He's the one who took first place in the test." At those words, the man's easy posture stiffened. He remembered Ethan's calm resolve when he clinched that victory, and the single flawless move that pinned Goo beneath him. Just recalling it sent a chill through his veins. For a moment, Soros abandoned all pretense of cheerfulness. Before his oldest companion, there was nothing left to hide. Despite years of shared adventures, his friend had never learned the full measure of Soros's own trials here. Now, the truth was laid bare. Thanks to Ethan's efforts, even Soros could raise a small contingent inside the base. As the officer who knew Soros best, Yu Guang saw the change in his expression and felt his face go pale. "Wait, are you seriously going to let him walk away untouched?" Yu Guang demanded. "And besides, how can you be sure he's the right man for this?" Everyone here knew how ruthless Soros could be. He hadn't even extended a shred of courtesy to Guga, whose own ties to the Rocket Corps base were no secret. With an older brother serving as a senior captain, Guga's prospects always soared the moment he stepped outside those walls. He was exactly the sort of high-value contact the second-in-command had tried to push on Ethan, and yet, apart from a few stern words, no one had dared lift a finger in his defense. Yu Guang glanced at the cluster of murmuring officers behind him, then turned back to Sky. "Do you really think you can bulldoze Guga just because your rank's higher? You call that a miracle? Either he's some deep cover agent or his security clearance is off the charts." Sky's lips tightened into a line, but before he could reply, Soros spoke in a cold, measured tone. "I've had Ethan tailed since he left the base. I watched him slip out through this very gate. You really think we'd pass up the chance to assign this mission to him?" I met Soros's steady gaze, my heart pounding. Sky's eye twitched. He understood all too well what putting Ethan on this task would mean. Ethan had to admit that Soros's proposal made sense, too much sense for him to dismiss outright. The real reason he declined the first time wasn't stubbornness, but the need to protect his secret. Still, he knew Soros was fair. If Soros could uncover Ethan's hidden advantage, he just might crack the rocket hierarchy's top 10. Across the room, Bisky's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. If luck hadn't dealt him a poor hand of Pokémon, if he'd been assigned stronger partners, he'd never have needed Soros's assistance, and Soros's influence on the base would be negligible. To be honest, Bisky judged himself superior in every respect, save for Soros's sunny smile and that underwhelming gas bomb technique. Yet circumstances had forced him to rely on Soros if he wanted to stand out in the trials. Frankly, aside from Guga, the Rocket's Pokémon assignments were pure chance. No black box favors here. You got whatever you got. Unaware of Bisky's scheming gaze, Soros let his own ambitions run free. If he could just unearth Ethan's secret, he'd secure the position of lead tester, and from there, he'd storm the rocket ranks and eclipse even the legendary quartet. "But we don't have to defeat him outright," Sky protested, still uneasy. After all, Anne was barely 20, hardly so much younger than she was. Soros shot her a glance, then signaled to the 5 warriors standing behind him. In a single, wordless exchange, they reached a decision: let Ethan face the challenge. Instantly, Soros's expression shifted into his trademark grin. He turned to the 5 elves, who'd been arguing amongst themselves, and with a single raised eyebrow silenced them all. He had an uncanny knack for the dramatic. Leaning forward, clearly pleased, he addressed them. "Here's our chance. If Ethan succeeds, we all breeze through the trial, and if he falls short, one of you can simply present the prize to our queen, no harm done." At Shu Wenyan's words, the 5 warriors' eyes gleamed with excitement. Their skills were solid, but just shy of flawless. This opportunity could be exactly what they needed. "If there's a chance to clinch qualification, we have to seize it," Soros declared. Though his words carried weight, a few still hesitated. "Are you sure, Brother Soros?" one voice asked. Soros met him with a reassuring nod and a smile. "Absolutely. I just confirmed with Sky." Every eye swung to Sky. He offered a firm nod in return, and the room buzzed with excitement. Those 50 trial spots on the Rockets roster had been hanging over them like a dagger. If they could earn qualification on their own, they'd no longer have to depend on anyone else. They'd fought long enough for scraps. Soros and Sky exchanged triumphant glances. "From now on, you move only on my command," Soros continued, his tone steely. "No slacking, no half measures. Cross that line and you're done. No second chances." Sky stepped forward, his expression equally severe. In his position, there was no room for mistakes. The others stiffened. Losing this support would leave them stranded, with no way to advance inside the organization. Everyone knew it was all, or nothing. I gave a quick nod. Understood. Sky's eyes narrowed. "If you have any questions, wait until we're done. Don't distract the others." Her tone was sharp, warning us all to stay focused. "And remember, if you spot the target before Ethan does, you can't let him slip away. Take the shot immediately." I nodded again, silence my answer. At that moment, Soros rose to his feet and offered a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, I'll hang back and cover the rear. If anything dangerous shows up, I've got it under control." His confidence visibly eased the others. Soros had a reputation for reliability in tight spots. Yet Sky's expression turned icy, her gaze unreadable. Even now I wasn't sure if she truly trusted him. All right, Sky said, regaining her composure. She glanced at the damp ashes beneath our feet. Judging by the warmth of these embers, they couldn't have gone far. Let's pick up the pace and catch them. Though her voice was calm, I sensed her displeasure. She hid it perfectly behind that professional mask. Soros simply gave a curt nod, signaled for us to move, and led the team swiftly into the woods. Ethan made his way through the forest at a steady pace, completely unaware that someone back at the base was worrying over him, or that the trail of ash he'd accidentally left behind was being used to track his movements. Even if he had known, he wouldn't have cared. He was confident in his ability to slip away if a creature proved too much for him to handle. After all, he'd already conquered one of the base's fiercest beasts, and in his mind, that victory put him a cut above every other tester there. Suddenly, he stopped and raised a single hand. "All right, you stupid beasts," he said in a calm voice. "Meow, harry it with your mind screech. Dark Crow, finish it with a wing strike." A moment later, a wild meow, a level 20 orange-tier feline creature, sprang out of the underbrush, relying on its speed to catch Ethan off guard. But as it closed to within 3 meters, Ethan's mental barrier flared to life, repelling the charge and sending the meow stumbling back. Seizing the opportunity, the Dark Crow swooped down from a nearby oak. Instead, it unleashed a grating caw that sapped the meow's defenses. Then, with one powerful wing beat, it ended the fight in an instant. The two beasts collapsed together, lifeless in the undergrowth. A stark reminder that even the swiftest predators are no match for Ethan's cold precision and mastery of mind power. Ethan watched his two summoned beasts strike in perfect unison. The Teeth Beast unleashed its overwhelming psionic assault, seizing control of their foes' minds, while the Dark Crow swooped in to shatter defenses and deliver the killing blow. The elves collapsed in a chorus of pained cries, completely unable to withstand such a coordinated attack. Stepping forward, Ethan allowed himself a rare word of praise. "Well done, Dark Crow, and you too, dimwit beast." He reached into the hidden compartment of his belt and withdrew an intermediate energy block. With a swift motion, he tossed it to the crow, which caught it midair and immediately began pecking at the crystalline shard, its strength visibly returning. "The only thing you'll eat, beast, is an amber energy cube, and we don't have one right now," Ethan said, turning to the other creature. The dimwit beast let out an indignant grunt, but then sat back on its haunches and closed its eyes, slipping into a deep meditative state. Within minutes, its fur ceased to tremble, its formidable psychic reserves were fully restored. Ethan had long planned this. He wanted the beast to master on-the-go mental recovery just as reliably as the crow summoned wind at will. Without warning, the beast reached up and tugged on Ethan's pant leg, its eyes imploring. At the same moment, the Dark Crow fluttered down in front of him and let out a sharp, soft caw, an unmistakable signal. Ethan cocked his head. They were looking at him expectantly. Whatever they had in mind, it couldn't be good. After decoding the foolish beast's grunts and the Dark Crow's caws, Ethan's eyes finally snapped into focus. "So you're saying someone's been following us?" he asked, voice taut with alertness. Both creatures met his gaze and nodded in unison. Their signals meant multiple figures were trailing their steps. And in a forest this remote, there shouldn't be any other humans around, except the trialist. Chapter 43, The Hunt Begins, Mon Wed. "It looks like we still haven't settled this," Ethan said, his expression growing darker by the second. A cold, deadly light flared in his eyes. "Everyone's eager for answers. Since you want to test my strength, I'll show you just how big the gap really is." I concealed my own intent to kill, giving a subtle nod to the Dark Crow and the clumsy beast so they could remain in their natural forms and stay on guard. Ethan glanced around, frowning. "I just don't know who it could be. Guga?" His tone was calm, but I saw the uncertainty flicker across his features. "Guga," I fought back a smile. If Guga were truly dangerous, he wouldn't have survived past encounters, at least not in my previous life. "Could it be?" Ethan murmured, running through every name at our base. Aside from Guga, who spent most of his time complaining alongside the others, only one person fit the bill. Soros. Outwardly cheerful, but a coward at heart. My gut confirmed it. There was no one else it could be. I kept to our planned route, and Ethan's odd behavior drew no attention from Soros or the rest of the group trailing behind us. Ethan had deliberately led his pursuers onto the overgrown trail, thick brambles and twisted roots that slowed any but the hardiest traveler. At his side flitted a sleek, black crow. Lumbering behind him padded his slow-witted beast, Shunwenyan. Mile after mile, they slipped deeper into the wilderness, away from the well-worn paths the others would expect him to take. Hidden among the trees, Soros's party followed at a cautious distance. Frustration buzzed through them. "We should strike now, while he's unprepared," one whispered. Another nodded. "If we catch him off guard, this could be over in an instant." None of them realized that the very youth they trailed had finished first in the trials, a distinction earned only by someone exceedingly powerful. Had they known, they might have thought twice before plotting an ambush. At last, Ethan reached the secluded spot he'd scouted. He halted without warning, raising a hand. "Sun Wenyan," he called softly. "Return to our original position, now." A faint blue glow kindled in the dull eyes of the beast. In the same instant, Ethan exhaled a steady breath of power, weaving an emerald-green veil around both the crow and Sun Wenyan. The forest air shimmered, and then, as though swallowed by mist, both creatures vanished from sight. Soros and his companions, set to leap out of concealment, froze instead. Ethan was gone. All that remained were the footprints snaking off into the underbrush, the only evidence that he had ever been there. But when they crept to the spot where Ethan had been standing, the footprints simply vanished. Soros and Sky both went pale. "Damn it, they're gone," Sky swore, staring at the two isolated prints that remained. The hulking beasts they rode, thoughtless creatures, hovering mindlessly, had barely touched the ground, so the beasts themselves left no tracks. And worse, none of them realized that Ethan had just brought a new elf under his control. To their minds, the only way to pass this trial was to pour every resource into training one elf. Spreading their efforts risked utter failure. "He's found us," Soros growled, anger and alarm warring in his eyes. Ethan's abrupt disappearance could mean only one thing. He'd spotted them. Thinking of the dark crow strike Ethan had unleashed earlier, Soros's face twisted in fury. He signaled for his own men to edge closer, arranging their smoke bombs into a tight defensive ring around him. "Brother Soros, what's wrong?" one of the 5 underlings whispered, stepping forward. Soros met his gaze for a long moment, then said nothing, his expression hard as iron. Casey, standing at Ethan's side, wore a fierce expression that sent a clear warning through the underbrush. "Stay close," she murmured, her hand tightening on his arm as she led him down a narrow deer trail. Up ahead, Soros and Sky exchanged relieved glances. "We've lost him," Soros whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. Neither man wanted to admit how easily their quarry had slipped away. Better to let Ethan believe they numbered in the dozens, safer than confessing that one man had given them the slip. They dared hope that sheer intimidation of numbers would keep him from shooting first. But Ethan wasn't about to be cowed. Without a sound, he re-emerged at the point where their trackers had last marked his scent. As Soros and Sky stepped into the clearing, Ethan climbed onto a fallen log, his dark eyes shining beneath the hood of his cloak. A slow, grim smile curved his lips. "Well, gentlemen," he said softly, "it appears the hunters have become the hunted. Deception and overwhelming force win most skirmishes, but Ethan was no ordinary fighter. In a past life, he learned that absolute strength depends not on numbers, but on seizing initiative and denying the enemy any foothold. Aside from Soros, none of these men had ever seen true bloodshed. Over the past fortnight on Trial Island, the elves had honed their skills by leaps and bounds, and Ethan, once merely their trainer, had become their unbreakable spearhead. Ethan trained alongside the elves every day, matching their drills move for move. In this elven world, human physiology far outstrips that of Earth's. Humans grow faster, recover quicker, and develop greater strength. Coupled with Ethan's relentless, high-intensity workouts and a carefully calibrated diet, his body had become a finely tuned instrument of power. He wasn't as bulky as some of the elves, but against Soros and the others, who'd been lounging comfortably back at the rocket base, Ethan's conditioning was in a different league. From the moment they set foot in the forest, he'd refused to hold back. His endurance and agility already surpassed anything Soros could have imagined. Now, with a thought, Ethan shifted into his cheetah form. Sleek and silent, he slipped between trunks and leaped over fallen logs as though they were mere twigs. Where most would see obstacles, a narrow pass, a thick bramble, he saw only open ground. His intimate knowledge of the forest's hidden pathways let him close the distance in heartbeats. Soon he spotted the tall grass where Soros and the others must have taken cover. The blades were thick and lush, perfect for concealment. Ethan pressed low, muscles coiled for the strike. If he timed it right, they wouldn't even know he was there. With the forest holding its breath around him, he prepared to pounce. Under the scorching sun, Ethan watched Soros's motley crew advance, gas bombs that hissed toxic fumes, Sky's lethal able snake, and a swarm of lesser spirits, radar drones, supersonic bats, walking grass, and the like. Individually, none was a match for a skilled warrior, but together they still posed a modest threat. Ethan knew exactly how fragile they were. They, however, had only heard rumors of his true power and dared to hunt him, confident that sheer numbers would carry the day. Following Soros's orders to unearth the secret of Ethan's sudden disappearance, they fanned out through the tall grass. Sky cautioned them not to stray too far and to keep constant radio contact, but that very dispersion dissolved their greatest advantage, giving Ethan the perfect opening. Moving like a shadow in the undergrowth, Ethan struck with preternatural stealth and uncanny mastery of the wild. One by one, the beasts fell before they even realized they were under attack. Ethan slipped his hand into the hidden compartment of his rocket belt and drew out the slender dagger, its polished steel gleaming in the low light. He glanced at the charcoal-black crow perched on his shoulder and the sleepy hound trailing at his side, then spoke in a steady voice. "Stay sharp. We're going hunting." Chapter 44, Weakness is Both an Original Sin, Part 23. Ethan had spent long enough alongside the two elves that they moved in perfect harmony, anticipating each other's thoughts without a single word. When he gave the slightest nod, they understood immediately. It was time to strike. In the next instant, Ethan's form blurred, darting through the waist-high grass like an arrow released from a taut bowstring. A pale glow gathered at his feet, the silent blessing of the mind-linked beast at his side. No rustle of leaves, no whisper of wind, just pure, impossible stillness. Above them, the dark crow hovered at treetop level, wings barely stirring the air. Its keen eyes swept the meadow below, able to pierce even the thickest swathes of grass for hidden shapes. At the same time, Ethan's telepathic companion fanned out its mental senses in all directions, probing for the faintest sign of conscious life. Between sight and mind, nothing could escape their search. Ethan's sharp gaze froze on a lone figure, one of the 5 who had trailed behind Soros. Frustrated by his comrade's inability to pick up Ethan's trail, the man had slipped away, convinced that striking out on his own would yield the advantage Soros had promised. He moved cautiously, every footstep careful, every breath measured, yet utterly unaware that 7 vigilant hunters were closing in. From the man's vantage point, he was safe. The distant rustle of the others lulled him into a false security. He believed himself cunning, believing that if he lost sight of Ethan, nothing could come from the undergrowth. But he had forgotten one crucial truth. Ethan was no ordinary prey. With the elves flanking him and his mind-linked beasts sweeping the terrain, Ethan was already upon his target. The figure in the grass, confident in his solitude, was about to discover just how deadly it can be to draw the attention of a hunter who cannot be lost. Ethan moved through the dim forest with the ease of a shadow, his raven familiar, Lada, circling just above the leafy canopy. Every nerve was alert for an ambush. These woods were rumored to shelter wild elves, fiercely protective of their domain. Keeping Lada close, Ethan followed the fresh trail of a lone hunter who thought himself safe. At last, he caught sight of the man and his elven companion standing amid a clearing. Without hesitation, Ethan reached out through their psychic bond to Lada. At his command, the raven's shape dissolved into a swirl of inky black light. Its wings pulsed with raw, crackling energy overlaid by a blinding white glow. The ground trembled as that force washed across the clearing. Realization and horror flashed in the elf's eyes. It sprang forward to defend its master, but the spirit was little more than a fledgling, no match for Lada's unleashed power. In an instant, Those razor-sharp, energy-charged wings sliced through the elf's flimsy defenses, pinning it to the grass. Blood blossomed on the blades. The man froze, his throat caught in Lada's unbreakable mental grip. He watched in stunned silence as his companion crumpled, life ebbing away in a red stain. Panic and disbelief warped his features. Then he looked up and recognized Ethan, the ruthless contender who had snatched second place in the grand trial, crushing his own ambitions. Fear transformed into desperation. The man opened his mouth, eyes pleading for mercy, but no sound passed his lips. Ethan advanced without a word, drew a dagger, and in one swift, merciless motion slit the man's throat. Dark blood spurted into the fallen leaves, and the forest exhaled around them, returning to its hushed stillness. Ethan stood over the bodies, expression unreadable. Lada reformed on his outstretched arm, wings folding neatly across its chest, as if nothing more than an ordinary raven. Together, master and familiar turned and vanished into the undergrowth, silent as death itself. Ethan felt no fear of death, only a flash of dread. He carefully wiped the last drop of blood from his dagger on his coat, unclipped the belt, and slid the weapon into its sheath. In the next heartbeat, he'd melted back into the tall grass, every movement as crisp and precise as a seasoned assassin's. "I didn't want to strike first," he whispered, voice low and deadly. His eyes gleamed with cold resolve. "But you came looking for me. If you want to kill, you'd better be ready to die." He hadn't yet revealed the full extent of his fury, and he intended this night to become a nightmare none of the trainers would ever forget, if they lived to dream at all. "Only the dead make reliable enemies," he murmured. "You drew the first blood. I won't show an ounce of mercy." True to his word, within 5 minutes, Ethan had discreetly eliminated 2 more assailants. His blade flashed in the moonlight with clean, efficient strokes, so swift that bystanders hardly knew what had happened. Yet even as their bodies crumpled, the remaining Soros operatives were rallying, their shouts carrying over the field. Ethan paused, listening. With the attack now fully underway, there was no going back. The Soros unit would be on high alert, every shadow concealing a new threat. He pressed himself flat against the earth, heart pounding. He'd thrown the first punch in their bloody dance, and now they would come for him with everything they had. Ethan didn't even flinch at being discovered. He knew their opponents were formidable, only the messiness of the situation gave him pause. Before the others could regroup, he was already on the move, charging straight at the nearest figure. This time, he made no attempt to hide. The tall grass whipped aside as he sprinted. He felt the faint rustle of blades shaking, a sign that Soros had also detected someone approaching, and together they closed in. Ethan burst through the cover and intercepted another combatant before he could link up with his allies, a lone elf cautiously picking his way through the undergrowth. The elf spun around at Ethan's sudden appearance, immediately dropping into a ready stance. Ethan pulled up a few paces away, his expression hard as stone. The elf's eyes went wide in shock. "I never imagined it would be you, the original Ethan," he gasped. The sudden dilation of his pupils, that horrified look, everything made it plain how stunned he was. He'd finally realized that the first Ethan Soros and Sky had warned him about was standing right in front of him. But by then, it was far too late to back down. The metallic tang of spilled blood still lingered on the breeze, a grim echo of Ethan's earlier strike. "He's here," the elf cried, voice cracking. He swung his weapon into position and squared his shoulders, bracing himself against the coming storm. Ethan's eyes gleamed as he sized up the battlefield. "Dark Crow, get ready to defend," he ordered, "and lure the walking grass into striking first. Once it commits, hit it with your opening assault and bind it. Double restraints. I want it pinned down before it can react." Watching the creature's tentative advance, Ethan let a small, satisfied smile curve his lips. "Good. It's playing right into our hands." He didn't waste a moment. "Now, Dark Crow, unleash a wind gust to send that poison powder right back at it. Show this stubborn foe what happens when it underestimates us." At his command, the inky feathered crow beat its wings, gathering charged air into 2 tight cyclones. Lavender-tinted poison dust whipped around them as the vortices surged forward in a straight line, aiming for both the walking grass and its trainer. The trainer caught sight of the onrushing storm, and threw up an arm to block, already bracing to roll aside. But before he could finish the motion, a sudden wave of vertigo gripped him. His vision blurred, his knees buckled, and, just like that, he collapsed unconscious on the battlefield. The clearing fell deathly silent after the last echo of the beast's psychic roar. Blood spurted from the mercenary's nose as he staggered and collapsed, his life force and that of his summoned plant creature sapped away by the devastating spirit shock. Bound by the beast's skill and the crushing mental onslaught, Got, both man and familiar, lay inert, utterly drained of vitality. From the forest's edge, Soros and his lieutenant Sky emerged, followed by a single, trembling guard. The trio had assumed this would be a routine operation, nothing more than point scoring for Soros. Even if they encountered resistance, they felt confident their numbers would carry the day. Now, facing the ruin of their comrade, they realized how badly they'd misjudged the situation. The guard's eyes widened in fear the moment he recognized their adversary. Ethan stood unmoving, observing the fallen with cold composure. Then a slow, wicked smile curved his lips. "We meet again, Soros," he said, his voice low and unhurried, an unambiguous challenge hanging in the air. Chapter 45, The First Subordinate, Part 3. A chill ran down Soros's spine at Ethan's words. He hadn't expected this. He'd underestimated Ethan's strength. Now, watching the dark crow wheel menacingly overhead and the pink-skinned elf dwarf poised at Ethan's side, Soros realized his mistake. While everyone else had been scrambling for their first summon, Ethan had already claimed his second. His power now eclipsed theirs. A swift glance across the battlefield confirmed it. Soros was outmatched. He fixed Ethan with a glare so fierce it felt lethal, then ground his teeth. "Fine," he spat. "This round's a draw. Fall back." He grabbed his still-stunned subordinate and turned to flee. Ethan's lips curved in a contemptuous smile. "Leaving already?" he drawled. "I think you're a bit late." Ethan nodded to Shu Wenyan standing beside him. She lifted her staff, voice calm but commanding. "Dark Crow, wind!" In an instant, the ravens responded. Their inky wings whipped up a roaring gale that slammed into Soros's rear guard, sealing off every route of escape. Soros froze, face twisting with rage as he realized retreat was no longer an option, and that this battle was far from over. Ethan didn't budge under Guga's sneer. Guga laughed softly. "So you trust your trapper won't break? They never fail, unless you want to find out the hard way." With that, Guga stepped forward, and the Murkrow on his shoulder flapped its wings in unison. Every one of them wanted Ethan out of the way, but Ethan wasn't the type to back down without a fight. "Caw!" The Murkrow darted in, talons ready. Before it could strike, Soros's face went pale. Yu Guang, standing quietly at Soros's side, caught his friend's eye and slipped him a small signal. Ethan followed Soros's gaze to the unassuming trainer beside him and to the coiled serpent at that trainer's feet. He brought up the Pokemon's data on his battle pad. Pocket Monster, Arbok, Shiny. Gender, female, level 19, type Poison, ability Shed Skin. Held item, none. Signature move, Poison Tail moves, Rising Leer, Bite, Glare, Hyper Fang. Egg move, Acid TM, compatibility, none. Ethan raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected someone to train an Arbok all the way to level 19 already. He looked back at Sky, impressed, and braced himself for what came next. Formal qualifications aside, anyone would have named Ethan their leader by now. He stood perfectly calm, and even Soros deferred to his judgment, a silent acknowledgement of Ethan's ruthless efficiency. A flicker of thought passed through Ethan's eyes. "What's your name?" he asked Sky, his tone deceptively casual. Sky froze at the unexpected question, then swallowed hard and managed, "Sky." They were at a deadly disadvantage. Provoking Ethan further was unthinkable. Buying time with words was their only hope of finding an escape. A direct attack? Don't be absurd. Just look at the corpse lying on the ground. At first, they'd believed Ethan relied solely on that lethal dark crow, so they'd only risked an assault after careful deliberation. Now he'd revealed a second beast, equally formidable, and the three of them, one still reeling from shock, had no hope of matching his power. There was simply no comparison. Sky wouldn't make the same mistake Soros had by antagonizing Ethan again. Sky weighed every possible escape route and found none. She froze in place, her heart pounding. She'd done everything she could to bring Soros over to her side. After all, thanks to his power and connections, he'd amassed vast resources and raised his Aberdeen serpent to its present might. Even formidable names like Ye Cheng and Xiao He had fallen before him. Still, no one was prepared for what came next. Ethan's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "You've done well," he said quietly, "but I wonder, would you like to work for me?" The change was instantaneous. Sky's followers, who only moments before had looked resigned to defeat, suddenly glowed with renewed hope. If Ethan was willing to recruit Sky, perhaps their fortunes weren't sealed after all. And Soros went pale. His face flushed red, then turned ashen gray, and finally ghostly white. He had expected Ethan to press his advantage or demand capitulation, not extend an invitation. All his carefully laid plans to side with Sky now threatened to unravel in that single, unexpected offer. For the first time since this nightmare began, hope flickered in the hearts of the defeated, born from the man they'd feared most. Ethan's words snuffed out the last spark of hope in the room. Every eye turned to him as he fell silent, then he fixed his gaze on Sky. She met his stare without blinking, her expression carefully unreadable. Was he genuinely offering an alliance, or merely planting seeds of distrust to pick them off one by one? The tension was palpable. Observers held their breath, but Ethan said nothing, waiting. After a long, loaded moment, Sky broke her gaze and stood straighter, as if resolving herself. She would answer, but before she could speak, a quiet resolve settled over Ethan's features. His proposal had not been a whim. As a former operative of Rocket Division 1, Ethan knew better than anyone how the organization worked. Within the Rocket ranks, you faced only two real choices: swear loyalty to an existing faction or dare to become a faction yourself. Pledging allegiance was the far easier path. It took only a handful of recruits to establish a new cell, but it still meant answering to someone more powerful. Ethan had weighed his options and chosen the harder route. If he truly wanted the resources and freedom to shape his own destiny, he would have to build his own faction from the ground up. Ethan hadn't yet established his own faction, but that didn't stop him from quietly staking his claim and laying the groundwork for what lay ahead. Right now, while everyone was still tied up in the trial, was the perfect moment to bury his chess pieces. In his previous life, Guga had climbed the ranks of the Rockets in large part because he'd formed his own team on the trial island, setting the stage for future success. Ethan intended to do the same, even if his squad never saw action. It was always better to be prepared. He'd chosen Sky partly on a whim of good fortune, but also because the young elf possessed genuine talent. Ethan believed that, given the right guidance and resources, Sky would exceed all expectations. He didn't keep him waiting. Cornered by the offer, and well aware of the consequences of refusal, Sky ground his teeth and nodded. "All right, I'll do it." Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. A refusal today would have been tantamount to signing his own death warrant, and yet Sky's answer came without hesitation. Ethan regarded him with renewed approval. With an elf of Sky's caliber at his side, he thought, he might soon rival even Soros. "Could you please share the full chapter text that you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the original passage, I'll polish it into a smooth, idiomatic English version with Ethan as the male protagonist." Chapter 46. Deploy the Gas Bombs. When Soros heard Sky's reply, his eyes instantly flared red with fury. In that moment, his hatred for Sky eclipsed even his resentment toward Ethan. Without another word, he spun on his heel and fled. Originally, having joined forces, Sky and the others could have posed a real threat to Ethan, but now, alone, Soros had no choice but to run for his life. Ethan watched Soros's retreat with a contemptuous smile. If the beast had dared to stand and fight, Ethan might have at least respected him. Instead, he raised his free hand and snarled, "You foolish creature! Spirit shock!" Crimson light pulsed in Soros's eyes as he screamed. A wave of spiritual energy erupted from Ethan's outstretched palm, arcing toward the fleeing monster. But before the attack could reach him, Ethan barked one more command. "Gas bombs! Intercept!" Soros glanced back in panic, his face draining of color. In his desperation, he readied the bombs, but they wavered in midair, torn between following Soros's frantic orders and obeying their masters. With a faint hum, the gas bombs at last heeded Ethan's command, coalescing into a dense wall of mist that blasted directly into the path of the spirit shock, neutralizing the attack and buying Soros a few precious seconds to escape. Ethan's monster was built for exactly this kind of fight. Its superpower granted it twice the normal resistance to toxins, and it had virtually no defense against gas attacks, until now. Soros's highly potent gas bomb burst around it, but the creature barely reacted. With a thunderous roar, it lunged forward and delivered a single crushing blow. It snorted defiantly, staggered, then collapsed to the ground, utterly spent, its will to resist shattered. Sky, standing at Ethan's side, narrowed his eyes. On the surface, he appeared perfectly composed, but inside, he was scrambling to rearrange his strategy. He'd planned to neutralize the beast first, and then reassess his options. He never imagined Soros's fearsome gas bombs would be so decisively repelled. Maybe I should really just surrender, he found himself thinking, astonished by how quickly the tide had turned. A sudden gleam of jade light flickered in Ethan's eyes as he met Sky's gaze. His face remained impassive, but that split-second flash revealed how calmly he'd anticipated this victory. Ethan made no move to strike again. He understood that Sky would never yield without coercion, and it had been the quiet threat in his voice that forced Sky's reluctant nod. He didn't need to batter his opponent into submission. The certainty of control was enough to extinguish any spark of rebellion. Soros, desperate to escape, realized too late that his gas bomb had failed. Panic flared in his chest as he broke into a frenzied run, yet as a mere human, he stood no chance of outrunning the elves. "Dark Crow, take care of him," Ethan ordered calmly. Soros, who had once planned to fight back to the last breath, froze in embarrassed disbelief. Ethan watched with mild curiosity as the great black bird tilted its head in acknowledgement. With a powerful beat of its wings, Dark Crow darted behind Soros. In a heartbeat, its talons raked across him, and Soros crumpled to the ground, a lifeless body added to the clearing. Once admired for his good looks at the base, Soros never dreamed it would end like this. Only one man now lay alive among their foes, but Ethan didn't move to finish him off. If he intended to form his own team, he couldn't rely solely on Sky. This unexpected survivor might prove useful. Ethan strode over to Soros's body and knelt beside him. Soros's eyes remained wide, glassy with horror and regret. With practiced efficiency, Ethan unclasped the rocket belt from Soros's waist and removed the elven orb attached to it. He flipped the orb's switch, drawing in the spent gas bombs strewn across the ground. When the container glowed full, he locked it shut and rose, ready to decide the prisoner's fate. In Sky's stunned eyes, Ethan nonchalantly tossed him the orb containing the gas bomb spirit. N waved his hand. "From now on, this spirit's yours. I expect you won't let me down." The gas bomb spirit, originally Soros's, carried a dark yellow rank, at least 1 or 2 grades above Sky's orange-ranked Able Serpent. "For me," Sky repeated, disbelief etched on his face. He glanced at the envious stares from the other trainees, but clasped the orb tightly anyway, as if it were a lifeline. His fingertips went white from the pressure. This was the very spirit that had placed 5th in the last trial, a prize few could resist. Ethan frowned. "What's wrong? Can't hold it?" Ethan knew spirits don't readily accept a change of master once they've bonded, but he trusted Sky's abilities implicitly. Sky flinched, then bowed quickly. "No, thank you, sir," he stammered, suddenly uncertain what to call him. "Just call me Ethan." He shrugged, indifferent to formalities. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan." Sky's voice was polite, almost reverent, as he bowed again and again, carefully finding his place in the new hierarchy. At last satisfied, Ethan merely nodded in approval. On paper, Sky was older, 18 to Ethan's 15, and taller by a head. Yet he bent himself so low, so deferentially, that he looked smaller than Ethan, as if he were a servant rather than an ally. It was the same carrot-and-stick tactic Ethan had sharpened in his past life, and once again, it worked beautifully. Ethan's gaze drifted to the young man standing beside him. Though fear flickered in his eyes, there remained a spark of stubborn defiance. A flicker of envy crossed Ethan's face as he recognized the raw courage he once possessed. Meanwhile, Sky continued to fawn, a half-hearted attempt born from desperation. This day pulsed with a strange excitement. All 4 of Ethan's original companions had fallen in battle, and even Soros, the revered leader, had not escaped death. As second in command, Sky had betrayed the group at the worst possible moment. Now, with no clear path forward, his fate, and possibly his life, lay in the hands of strangers. Ethan breathed in the tension. Allies and enemies had blurred into one, and every bowed head, every whispered title, felt like another move on a shifting chessboard. The game had only just begun. Ethan watched the wounded man slump to the ground, barely conscious, until Sky delivered a sharp kick that snapped him to attention. The captive scrambled upright, eyes wild as he met Ethan's and Sky's steely gazes. His face went ashen, and he stammered. "Master, Blueen, Greenethan, Ethan, my name is Fox. Everyone calls me Fox. My elf is a gas bomb type. I surrender. Please, don't kill me." Ethan raised his scanner and swept it over the man's elf. A brief whir of data. Level 16, orange rarity, gas bomb class. Not spectacular, but for someone who'd survived this long, it was a respectable combat asset. He tucked the device away and spoke in a low, even tone. "From now on, you'll serve under Sky." "Yes, thank you," Fox blurted out, relief flooding his pale features. He crouched and bowed his head, gratitude and fear mingling in his voice. Better this than remaining under Soros's unstable command. Ethan, ranked number 1, held absolute authority over Soros now. Fox knew he couldn't afford to cross that chain of command. Sky gave a curt nod, and Fox rose obediently, ready to follow. With that simple order, Ethan had gained not just a new recruit, but also an ember of loyalty, one more piece in his growing puzzle of allies. Chapter 47, continuing on the road to Wed. "Sky, once we get back, begin recruiting under my name," Ethan said, folding his arms. "I have one, and only one requirement. They must be villains, not hypocrites." That was it. Ethan despised self-righteousness. He'd seen too many honorable testers burn out or die within weeks, and none of them ever made it into Team Rocket. He wasn't looking for saints. His recruits could be brutes, thieves, or loose cannons, so long as they were honest about who they were. Hypocrites, on the other hand, he could not abide. Take Guga and Soros, for example. Ethan would much rather deal with someone quick-tempered than a coward who relied on backdoor schemes. "Understood, Lord Ethan," Sky replied, eyes alight with eagerness. He just laid hands on Soros's gas bomb, and with a little training, it could become a devastating weapon in their arsenal. Combined with Ethan's own reputation as a top-ranked trainer, Sky felt confident they could attract even the most solitary rogue operatives. Ethan allowed himself a rare smile. Fate had dealt him a curious hand. Not only had he escaped unscathed from his last ordeal, but he'd also come away with an exceptional Pokémon. Give it time and rigorous training, he was certain, and this new partner would one day rival anything Soros could field. Ethan's grip on the gas bomb tightened, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He glanced up at Soros. This was exactly the kind of leader who never bothered with trivial details. All the resources they'd gathered still needed someone to oversee them personally, and Ethan dared not entertain even the smallest hope of keeping any for himself. His own strength and potential were top tier. By staying close to Soros, his standing in Team Rocket would surely soar. Suppressing a groan, Ethan reached into his pack and pulled out Soros's rocket belt. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it to Sky. "Here, you earned these points. Consider it your seed money." Truthfully, Ethan didn't value rocket points all that highly, but even the tiniest sliver of capital could be Sky's springboard to something bigger. Across the clearing, Bisky watched the belt land at Sky's feet, his expression a tumult of conflicting emotions. He and Soros had grown up side by side as both rivals and comrades. Yet time and again Soros's luck had eclipsed his own, leaving him perpetually one step behind. Perhaps it was precisely because Soros's good fortune had run so long that his one disastrous misstep, his plunge into what felt like a bottomless abyss, failed to slow him at all. No one dared challenge Soros afterward, and that only deepened the knot of envy and doubt twisting in Bisky's chest. "Listen," Ethan said coolly to Sky. "If you can't complete your mission this time, drop it. Your priority is securing the gas bomb, then worry about acing the next test." Without waiting for a response, he turned and plunged into the forest. Sky watched his broad back vanish among the trees. Whether she'd find her way home or survive at all in the wilderness wasn't Ethan's concern. If she lacked the skills to live off the land, so be it. Beside her, the dark crow and the foolish beast followed Ethan into the shadows, spared from death by his own decision, one that, as elves, they dared not question. Fox let out a long sigh and sank to the ground, barely registering the motionless body at his side. The clearing felt stifling in the aftermath of violence. Two freshly fallen foes bore silent witness to the encounter. "He really sees through us," Scan murmured, eyes fixed on the path Ethan had taken. The forest swallowed his words, leaving only the echo of their uneasy alliance behind. Ethan winced against the throbbing in his temples. Now that he'd finally recruited an elf with top-tier potential, all that remained was to train him properly, and he was certain the boy would shine. He hadn't placed much faith in Sky or Fox, but giving this yellow-rank elf a chance couldn't hurt. After all, it was only the trial island. Failure carried no real penalty. An hand through his hair and forced a wry smile. "My head's killing me, and I've gone and lost the trail again." Earlier, to deal with Soros and his lieutenants, Ethan had deliberately veered off the main road. He'd lured them into these tall grasses, used every root and ridge for cover, and taken them down one by one, capturing 2 of their men in the process. He knelt beside his silent companion, a shadowy beast whose teleportation skill had saved them more than once. "All right, buddy," he said softly. "Teleport Dark Crow and me back to the road." The creature's eyes flared bright blue. Without a single sound, a shimmering wave of energy rolled outward, wrapping Ethan and Dark Crow in its glow. Then, nothing. When Ethan opened his eyes again, sunlight filtered through familiar leaves overhead. Before him lay the well-trodden path of the trial island, every step of it beckoning him onward. "Excellent work, you clumsy oaf!" The elf instructor barked with a satisfied grin as Ethan landed gracefully in front of him. Instantaneous movement is one of the most practical and magical survival skills you can learn. Whether you need to charge into battle or slip away unnoticed, it can turn the tide in an instant. But don't be fooled. This gift has serious limitations. First, your range is limited by the strength of your spirit. A weak spirit barely carries you a few dozen meters. A seasoned elf with a mighty spirit can cover hundreds. Second, you can only teleport to places you've already visited. Your mind must hold a clear image of your destination. No mental map, no jump. Third, if you try to leap while under the influence of other supernatural forces, you risk spatial distortion. You could wind up anywhere, or nowhere, if those energies clash as you move. And finally, the farther you travel, the longer you must concentrate before release. Scanning distant coordinates takes time, and that delay can leave you exposed. Keep these constraints in mind, Ethan. Master them, and instantaneous movement will become your greatest ally in the wild. Ethan nodded, heart pounding with excitement. He pressed his palm to the rune etched on his forearm, feeling the surge of power as the lesson sank in. This was only the beginning. Ethan paused at the edge of the familiar road, hands on his hips as he surveyed the landscape he once knew so well. He needed to press on, but instead of retracing his steps all the way back to the clearing where he'd first tangled with that foolish beast, he simply returned to the spot he'd just left. Having walked this path before, he knew its twists and turns, and he picked up his pace accordingly. According to his map, the mission site lay only a short distance ahead, but to reach it, he would have to pass through several elven domains. The first was the territory of the flying mantis elves. Ethan had always admired this aerial race, and if he found a truly exceptional specimen, he might even try to capture one. These mantises didn't evolve in the usual way. Instead, they branched into a giant form clad in metal armor. That armor didn't boost their natural talents. It simply traded some of their incredible speed for added physical defense, turning what was already a deadly assassin into an almost unstoppable warrior. With that in mind, Ethan braced himself and strode into the mantis domain, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan recalled that those giant clamp mantises must have reached a super-evolved state. If so, their strength would have grown exponentially. As he prepared to cross into the flying mantis territory, he braced himself. There was no way he'd be facing just one of them. Chapter 48, Flying Mantis, 3-3. Ethan had already tangled with temperamental sting bees and the feeble kairos, but the flying praying mantis was in a class by itself. Proud and aloof, these winged predators only struck back when provoked, and when they did, they called in the entire swarm. A lone mantis posed little threat, but the moment one sounded the alarm, dozens more swept down from the canopy in perfect coordination. Overwhelmed by sheer numbers, even a seasoned fighter could be crushed in an instant. Deeper into the ancient forest, Ethan braced himself for ever stronger elven beasts. He had no way of knowing how powerful the next mantis might be, but fretting wouldn't help. He tightened his grip on his weapon and picked up his pace. Beside him, the savage beast plowed through underbrush, its thunderous footfalls shaking fallen leaves to the forest floor. Overhead, the dark crow trailed him like a living shadow, talons ready and eyes ever watchful. Together, they made an unlikely trio, one man and two feral guardians, each lending the other's strength. An hour into the sprint, Ethan felt only a mild burn in his lungs. His stamina had improved drastically. What used to leave him gasping for breath now felt like a brisk run. For the crow and the beast, this flight through the woods was as effortless as taking a stroll. If it weren't for the constant threat of elven ambushes lining every shadowy path, Ethan thought wryly, this would feel more like a day off than a trial by fire. Ethan finally arrived at the region marked on his map as the flying mantis territory, and he steadily slowed his approach. Though his power had surged after defeating the foolish beast, he knew better than to let his guard down. So far, his journey had been surprisingly calm, aside from a few overconfident wild elves who charged him only to be quickly cut down by Dark Crow and the foolish beast. No one else had dared to challenge him. Most elves, detecting the residual aura of evil and the foul stench around his allies, had chosen to steer well clear. Now, as he stepped into the very heart of the flying mantis domain, Ethan spotted a dozen of the insects locked in a brutal skirmish. Proud and fiercely territorial, they thrived on battles against opponents of equal strength, and thus far, no elf in these forests had been deemed a worthy adversary. Intrigued, Ethan paused behind a cluster of ferns, watching their razor-sharp forelegs clash in midair. The mantises circled each other warily, their multifaceted eyes glinting like emeralds in the filtered sunlight. Then, at the slightest sound of his approach, they all snapped to attention and turned their deadly gaze toward him. Ethan drew in a steadying breath. This was exactly the kind of encounter he'd been preparing for, and he would not let these magnificent, lethal insects dictate the terms of battle. With the foolish beast at his side and Dark Crow perched on his shoulder, he tightened his grip on his spear. The fight for dominance in the flying mantis territory was about to begin. Ethan watched as the two battling mantises froze in place. Instantly, a larger, more imposing mantis strode forward and planted itself between its comrades and the three strangers. Its multifaceted eyes locked onto them with unwavering focus. A faint glow flickered across Ethan's scanning chip as it retrieved the creature's profile. Puppet elf, flying mantis, dark yellow. Gender, male. Level 23 attribute, insect plus flight. Trait, technical master equipment. None, genetic skill, perseverance. Basic skills, vacuum wave, flash of light, stare, gas gathering, chase, pinpoint strike, high-speed movement, wing attack. Teaching skills, insect summons, venomous bite. Current learners, none. This one's incredibly strong, Ethan murmured under his breath. Glancing at the surrounding mantises, he noted they too were formidable, each at least level 20, and two ranked as yellow-tier fighters besides their leader's dark yellow qualification. He shook his head, concluding there was no way he could capture even one of these speed-type elves, let alone all of them. The leader alone would be a daunting challenge. Ethan squared his shoulders, preparing himself for whatever would come next. Ethan crouched behind his two guardians, a hulking, horned, foolish beast and the sleek, sable-feathered Dark Crow, eyeing the dozen or so giant mantises swarming toward them. Individually, those mantises packed a terrible punch, but none could match Dark Crow's speed or sidestep the beast's iron-hard hide. Even so, their sheer numbers gave them a dangerous edge. If they overwhelmed the beast before Ethan could teleport away, he'd be trapped. Ethan tightened his grip on the rune-etched dagger at his belt. None of these mantises had the cultivation or the innate talent that he required of his martial disciples. Still, they bristled with confidence. A handful even stepped forward, jabbing their scythe-like forelegs in challenge. To them, sparring with a Dark Crow and a lumbering beast sounded like the ultimate thrill. But just as claws began to snap, a towering mantis with gleaming emerald eyes raised a foreleg. Its chitinous armor gleamed under the moonlight. "Hold!" Its clicking voice buzzed across the clearing. The others froze, each beast's mandibles parting in frustration. From the leader's stance, Ethan sensed more than simple caution. Those emerald eyes lingered on him, on the human, more intently, more warily than on either creature at his side. In that silent moment, every mantis seemed to acknowledge an unspoken truth. This fight, they now realized, would not be the easy prey hunt they had imagined. Ethan sensed it the moment he entered their territory. Two elves at his side stiffened, and a ripple of unease spread through the flying mantis clan. He could almost hear the deep, ancestral warning in their minds. If you choose to fight us, be ready to face the deaths of your entire people. Even the fiercest warriors tremble at the thought of mass slaughter. Then the clan's leader stepped forward. With a flick of his armored foreleg, he halted the more impetuous mantises from charging. He regarded Ethan and the two elves with steady, respectful eyes, and at a gesture from him, the entire unit withdrew from the crossroads where they had been gathered. In their own way, the mantises recognized strength and respected it. As long as you proved yourself mighty, their lands remained open, their belligerence tempered by honor. Across the forest's edges, the local elves, long wary of their aggressive neighbors, had already begun to clear out, abandoning the enclaves that ringed the mantis domain. Within hours, the clearing fell silent, leaving the mantises' territory unchallenged. Ethan led the elves deeper into the woods. They moved swiftly but cautiously, following the path marked on the shadowy map they'd been given. By nightfall, they passed safely through the heart of the flying mantis realm. When dawn broke the next day, Ethan finally emerged from the dense forest onto the next stretch of their journey, map firmly in hand, ready to face whatever came next. If Ethan could just push through the stone forest ahead, he'd reach the chamber where the quest item lay hidden. But since that day's elf ambush, he'd been locked in one skirmish after another, each clash revealing more about the formidable elf domains sketched on his map. Beyond the initial flying mantis territory he'd skirted at the outset, Ethan now recognized an even larger mantis enclave. Dominating its airspace was a colossal level 23 sky mantis, backed by over a dozen of its kin at level 20 or above. Their sheer numbers and strength testified to the mantis tribe's savage might. A little farther on lay the realm of the Pyrus, a sprawling fungus forest whose giant mushrooms formed both habitat and larder. The Pyrus rarely strayed beyond the fungal groves that sustained them. At the heart of their territory presided a level 24 Perast, revered as the tribe's gentle but unassailable leader. Unlike many wilder elementals, the Pyrus and their Pylast relatives, lightweight, four-legged flyers, did not launch unprovoked attacks on intruders, yet even they eyed the dark crow with palpable dread. Busy with their own migrations, they left Ethan undisturbed, allowing him to press on toward his goal. There were surprisingly few truly skilled elves among the Parath. Despite the tribe's vast numbers, genuinely gifted individuals were rare. Still, Pyrus was home to many elves, and most of them lived together in harmony. So when Ethan led the dark crow and the foolish beast through their lands, they met with almost no hostility. Chapter 49, Testi Nido, Monwed. Ethan's puppet had barely cleared the Pyrus territory when it stumbled into the domain of the Nido tribe, a swarm of monkey-like monsters whose tempers were as sour as unripe fruit. Unlike the Pyra beasts, these monkeys showed no hesitation in unleashing a merciless assault on any creature, even an elf, that dared trespass among their trees. The Nido tribe held claim to a massive forest of towering fruit trees, the largest Ethan had ever seen on Trial Island. Their territorial instincts were ferocious. Any living being crossing into their grove without explicit permission was instantly branded a thief and met with a frenzied, all-out attack. At the heart of this savage horde reigned the king of the Nidos, a hulking level 23 monkey monster whose mere presence carried the unmistakable aura of a boss. With the king's blessing bolstering his strength, he had only just attained green rank status, and was every bit as formidable as the island's other top predators. Behind him, countless ordinary Nidos packed the undergrowth, their numbers alone making them a force to be reckoned with. No sooner had Ethan's puppet entered the sun-dappled clearing than a roar rose from the treetops. Dozens of monkey monsters, each certain that any intruder was there to steal their precious fruit, leapt into action. The forest exploded in chaos as the Nido tribe descended in a furious stampede, determined to drive out the uninvited interloper. Ethan gave the order for his dark crow to pluck the ripest fruit from the ancient tree. The moment the bird's talons closed around the prize, the undergrowth exploded with movement. Hundreds of snarling, monkey-like creatures charged forward, their shrill cries tearing through the air as though Ethan had pilfered their last precious honeycomb. He didn't flinch. With a single whistle, he unleashed both of his summoned allies. Dark Crow dove into the swarm like a shadow, its razor-sharp beak and talons carving a path through the front lines. At the same time, the hulking stupid beast thundered in from the flank, its massive paws smashing any creature foolish enough to stand its ground. Between the crow's lethal aerial strikes and the beast's bone-shattering charges, the monkey monsters staggered. Ethan seized his moment. Feet flashing in superhuman arcs, he wove through the fray, launching an unpredictable barrage of martial techniques that caught the enemy off guard. Then, with a grunt of effort, he scooped up Dark Crow and flung it into the densest cluster of beasts, sending them scattering like startled insects. Within moments, Ethan burst free of the monkey monster territory. The toll was unmistakable. Nearly 1,000 of the creatures had attacked, yet under Ethan's tactics and his beast's fury, at least 100 lay defeated. Their morale and fighting efficiency had plummeted by some 30%, enough to discourage even the hardiest tribe. And there was another reward. Both summoned creatures had grown more powerful through the ordeal. Dark Crow's level had jumped to 19, while the stupid beast now roared at level 21, proof that even a desperate, chaotic skirmish could yield invaluable gains. Ethan surveyed his companions with quiet satisfaction. They had gained far more than mere experience over the last few days. The Dark Raven's flight techniques had become noticeably sharper, and even the so-called dumb beasts in his party were demonstrating a surprising mastery of superpowers. Honestly, the progress felt like a true reward for all their hardships. Just yesterday, they'd pressed through the monkey monster's territory. The skirmish exhausted both Raven and beasts, forcing Ethan into a frantic retreat through dense forest. Only after weaving through the enemy ranks did they finally break free and discover a small, sheltered glade. There, Ethan made camp for the night, giving his elves and his animal allies time to rest and recover. A large part of that recovery owed to the Huanguo energy blocks he'd been feeding them. Thanks to those miraculous cubes, the East's vitality and their rank insignias had steadily rebounded. In fact, after the fierce battle with the monkey monsters, their markers had leapt into the dark green tier, edging one full rank above the Dark Raven itself. That modest upgrade translated into nearly a 2-level jump in their superpower control, a stunning advance, especially considering that even before all this, their mastery had already been the best among creatures of the same tier. Under these circumstances, the Dark Crow layered 2 additional conditioning protocols to help the creature more precisely channel its superpowers. Watching its progress with a spark of envy for his companion's growing strength, he found himself driven to take one more step. So he granted Ethan permission to bulk up by an extra 5 pounds. Originally, Crow had insisted on a hefty 15-pound gain in a single burst, but after Ethan's repeated protests about the strain on his body, he compromised. Ethan, of course, understood the dangers behind such rapid weight increases. Piling on mass too quickly can stir up hidden troubles, what they called dark illnesses, corruptions that fester beneath the surface. Having overseen other trainees, he knew all too well how insidious these maladies could be. He'd watched exceptionally talented elves neglect a minor wound after a battle, only to let it decay into a dark illness. In the end, their performance suffered more than that of less gifted peers. And once a dark illness took hold, it was notoriously difficult to eradicate. Ethan frowned as he tightened Dark Crow's new weighted harness. He'd once considered long-term conditioning the only way to build true strength, but all those months of waiting had taught him its fatal flaw. No matter how fit Dark Crow became, it couldn't train or fight while immobilized. By the time its dark sickness was cured, Ethan decided he'd wasted more time than he could afford. Now he favored short, focused drills. Over the past week, He'd added 5 kilograms to Dark Crow's load, bringing the total to 15. The extra weight barely slowed its strikes, yet each blow now carried noticeably more force. Satisfied, Ethan slipped the harness into place and set off again. A few miles beyond the last skirmish with low-level Nidoran, he emerged into the territory of the region's most formidable pack. There were only 5 of them, small in numbers but unmatched in reputation. 3 members had already surpassed level 10, yet none dared challenge the 2 pack leaders, King Nido, a colossal level 32 Nidoran, and his right-hand lieutenant at level 30. The other 3 were the king's own offspring, each a budding warrior. Their domain was the forest's richest corner. A crystal-clear lake lay at its heart, its surface so still it mirrored the sky. A gentle slope rose from the water's edge, blanketed in low emerald grass. Tall oaks and maples formed a protective ring, their leaves whispering in the breeze. From the shadows of the tree line, Ethan watched, Dark Crow perched on his shoulder, every muscle coiled and ready for what came next. Ethan crested the gentle slope and paused to take in his surroundings. Around him fluttered a handful of delicate local butterflies, weak creatures to be sure, but fiercely loyal as playmates and bodyguards to the twin elves, Nidoling and Nuttolin. The hillside was lush with fruit trees, medicinal herbs, and wild vines, while at its base lay a clear, trout-filled lake. Between its plentiful fish and the edible fruits overhead, this enclave was perfectly self-sufficient. So formidable were its defenders that no ambitious elf dared trespass. Yet today, Ethan's eyes widened in astonishment. At the water's edge stood not one but 2 regal figures, King Nido and Queen Nido. He'd heard tales that elves could reach their final form only with the help of the moon elves, Nidolino and Nidona, and even then, only one such monarch might emerge. Here, however, they both were, side by side. Curiosity pricked at him. If this secluded glade truly bore moonstones, those fabled gems of power, this was where they'd gather. Ethan melted into the underbrush and crept forward, each careful step bringing him closer to the shimmering lake. His heart pounded as he strained to glimpse a moonstone's pale glow among the rocks. Before he could inch any nearer, King Nido's eyes snapped open. With a thunderous cry, the monarch lunged, wings unfurling in a display of raw, ruthless strength. Ethan barely had time to dodge as the elf's strike tore into the ground where he'd just been standing. Whatever lay ahead, it was clear King Nido would not tolerate intruders. Hagi had the audacity to attack the legendary King Nido. Had he not relied on the Dark Crow's binding technique, he might even have landed a crippling blow. In the end, Ethan was forced to lean on his speed to escape the Nido King's fortress, and even then, he could feel those massive footsteps thundering close behind. Their expedition in search of the Moonstone would have to be put on hold until they'd grown stronger. Facing a single Nido King was already beyond their capabilities. Facing 2 equally formidable Nidos was unthinkable. When those 2 fight side by side, their power doesn't merely add up, it multiplies. It's no wonder they dominate such an enormous territory and command such abundant resources. And as for the so-called monkey monsters that roam their lands, they're nothing but chicks to the Nido King. If he ever chose to ignore his own strength, he could single-handedly crush every one of them. His impenetrable armor renders their feeble attacks meaningless, and a single sweep of those titanic arms would decimate the lot in an instant. King Nido's very presence in the territory kept the monkey monsters from daring to challenge his authority. Ethan only realized how formidable the Nido King truly was when he found himself driven from the beast's domain, hotly pursued by snarling fiends. Had it not been for the sudden intervention of a handful of Nidolang and Nidoran protecting his flank, King Nido would have pressed the attack, and then Ethan might never have escaped. At last, he crossed the boundary of Nido's realm and stepped into the looming stone forest ahead. He unfolded the battered map in his hand and whispered, "Just through this forest, then I'll find the quest site." A wave of relief washed over him. He was finally on the verge of the mission's objective. But there was no time to linger. If he hoped to return before the next trial began, every second now counted. Chapter 50, The Cute Rock Snake 23. Ethan finally reached a suitable spot, and there was no hurry now. After sprinting all morning, his first priority was lunch. followed by letting Dark Crow and the foolish beast rest and recover their strength. He found a broad, flat boulder and laid out his cooking gear. Despite its name, the stone forest wasn't entirely stone. Dry straw and brittle hay carpeted the ground between the towering rocks. Ethan stacked stones into a rudimentary fire pit, set a small pot atop it, and carefully poured in the lake water he had fetched earlier. In the wilderness, drinking untreated water was a gamble. Dark Crow, the foolish beast, and other elven creatures could shrug off bacteria that would fell a human in hours, but Ethan wasn't so hardy. A stray infection without proper medicine could spell disaster. He refused to take the risk. Ethan had never been wounded in battle out here, yet it wasn't the enemy's blade that tested him most, but the unrelenting grind of daily survival. Now, as he coaxed a pot of water to a rolling boil over a crackling fire, he laid out the ingredients for their next meal. A handful of energy bars for himself, a hare freshly caught by the Dark Crow, and the drowsy beast's prized haul of thick, silvery fish. Both creatures gathered around, mouths watering. The juvenile drowsy beast once devoured raw fish without complaint, but after tasting Ethan's grilled fillets, it turned up its nose at anything else, an opinion the Dark Crow eagerly shared. To make the feast safe from scavengers drawn by the scent of blood, Ethan and the drowsy beast worked together to clean the hare and 5 hefty fish, smearing their entrails with mud to mask any telltale odors. With the water now boiling, Ethan refilled his canteen, his afternoon ration secured. Then, with calm precision born of practice, he skewered the meat, brushed on just enough oil, and turned each piece over the glowing embers. A final dusting of herbs and spices later, the camp filled with the mouth-watering perfume of sizzling barbecue. For the first time in days, Ethan and his companions could look forward to a meal that would satisfy both hunger and spirit. Ethan only needed a rabbit leg and half a fish to satisfy his hunger. The rest of the day's haul had been nothing more than crows and other useless beasts. He and his companion made do with that modest meal, devouring it in minutes. After a short break to rest and digest, they hit the trail again. To his surprise, the stone forest proved easier to traverse than the dense woods. Everywhere he looked, towering pillars of rock shot up from the ground, creating an uneven surface, yet at least every stepping stone was plainly visible. In the forest, thick undergrowth and hidden pits made each footfall a gamble. Here, despite the jagged terrain, Ethan could place his feet firmly with every step. Scattered among the rocky columns were small stone creatures, little fist-shaped golems perched on piles of rubble. Though they were plentiful, they were harmless so long as no one disturbed them. They'd simply stand motionless and watch travelers pass. By mid-afternoon, Ethan realized these rocklings of the ochre forest were generally low-grade, nothing to worry about for a careful traveler. Ethan had been trekking through the stone corridor for nearly an hour now, and every wild Pokémon he'd encountered so far had been under level 20. He'd never run into anything like a Graveler, the hulking evolution of Geodude known for shaking the earth with every step. Thanks to the well-worn path, there'd been no surprise attacks, and Ethan's brisk pace carried him halfway through the cavern in just 30 minutes. At this rate, he'd reach his mission site in no time. But of course, nothing ever goes perfectly. Up ahead, the tunnel narrowed around a massive outcropping, and sprawled across it was a creature so enormous that it filled the entire corridor. Its dark yellow scales looked like sun-baked rock, and its coiled length wound lazily over a giant boulder. Ethan recognized it instantly. Species, colossal, commonly called the big rock snake. Gender, level 30. Type, rock ground. Characteristics, strong. Held item, none. Innate moves, roll out, rock climb. Basic moves, mud slap, tackle, harden, bind, curse, rock slide, rock block, rage, stealth, rock, sandstorm, spinning top, skydrop, dragon breath, beat up TM move, iron head, egg moves, none. The colossal wasn't growling or even watching him. It simply lounged there, its colossal girth blocking the only passage. It wasn't deliberately spiteful. It was just too large to move out of the way. Ethan stopped a dozen paces from the rock snake. Heart pounding, he unhooked a Pokeball from his belt strap. There was no easy detour. He'd have to face this level 30 beast head-on. He took a steadying breath. Time to see if his training could stand up to stone itself. Ethan knew that the only way forward was to clamber over the massive rock snake's broad back. Although a level 30 rock snake wasn't exactly a bloodthirsty monster, forcing his weight upon it would almost certainly earn its wrath. And trying to find another path was hopeless. The rocky walls on either side rose like unbroken ramparts, with no obvious detours. He forced a wry smile and muttered, "A level 30 rock snake, this is going to be tough." The Ochre Forest lay deserted and barren. No powerful tribe or civilization had staked claim to it. Instead, its only inhabitants were the low-level small fist stones and the more formidable rock snakes, both ever on the hunt for mineral-rich rocks. Scattered stones littered the forest floor, but none seemed to contain enough ore to be worth guarding. If these stones had been truly valuable, the small fist stones would surely have grown stronger by now. Yet here, basking lazily in a patch of sunlight, was this solitary rock snake, its intimidating 30th level obvious even from afar. Ethan paused, eyeing its scaly hide. Then a thought struck him, and his eyes gleamed with sudden purpose. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he raised his hand and commanded his beast companion, use rein beckoning on the giant rock snake's position. The beast, a hulking creature of few wits, tilted its head, opened its muzzle, and let out a low, melodious chant. Above the target's lair, the sky darkened. Black clouds gathered swiftly and hungrily, swirling into a compact storm directly overhead. Basking in the afternoon sun, the giant rock snake lay coiled on a flat boulder, its scales gleaming bronze. Without warning, the warmth drained away. It squinted against the sudden gloom, only to find the brilliant sun blotted out by rolling thunderheads. A light drizzle began to fall. The snake lifted its massive head, hissing in alarm, and scanned the clearing. There was nothing unnatural in sight. Yet the rain cloud hovered, centered precisely above its coils, while the surrounding sky remained clear and bright. Simple though it was, the rock snake understood that this damp patch was no accident. Still, unable to spot the source of its discomfort, it gave a reluctant hiss and resigned itself to the shadowy rain. When the first raindrop splashed against his rough scales, the great rock snake finally stirred. It had lain for years in its favorite sunlit alcove, but this creature, already 4 times weaker than most of its kind, could not abide a single drop of rain. Behind a weathered stone pillar, Ethan and his slow-witted companion watched in silence, waiting. In an instant, the serpent coiled, let out a low, rumbling hiss, and slid away. The grinding roar of stone on stone faded until at last the path it had blocked lay revealed, a narrow corridor carved between 3 towering cliffs, their walls rising like pillars toward an opening far above. Almost immediately, the dark clouds broke apart and the sun shone once more, leaving only scattered puddles among the rocks to testify to the brief shower. Ethan lingered for a few tense minutes, but when the rock snake showed no sign of returning, he turned to his companions, his raven perched loyally on his shoulder and the lumbering, dull-witted beast by his side, and motioned forward. Together, the 3 of them stepped onto the newly opened road, the cliffs soaring overhead and channeling their path into a perfect shaft of sunlight. Ethan paused at the mouth of the cavern, where the massive rock serpent lay coiled like a slumbering guardian. The instant he stepped into the pale shaft of light filtering down from above, the warmth he'd felt outside vanished, replaced by a biting chill, like standing in front of an open freezer on the hottest day of summer. The air here was bone-dry, carrying a stark, lifeless quality that grew more pronounced with every step he took. Not a single blade of grass or scrap of moss had managed to cling to life in this unforgiving place. No sunlight ever reached these depths. The cold winds blew in without bringing rain, and moisture was all but impossible to come by. Even the hardiest of plants would perish under such conditions, and the silence pressed in on Ethan, vast and blank. Up ahead, carved into the 3rd tier of the rock wall, was a yawning entrance. It stood over 2 meters tall and nearly 3 meters across, its gaping maw swallowed by darkness. Ethan drew in a steadying breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward into the black. Chapter 51, Eggs. Ethan stood before the cavern's mouth and hesitated. Why would there be a cave here, and one so clearly ancient? The entrance combined rough, natural stone with sections that had clearly been hewn by elven hands. The cut marks were blurred and worn, far more precise than anything produced by simple rock tools. "Hey, can you sense anything in there?" "Elves, maybe?" he asked the beast at his side. The creature's dull eyes glowed faintly as it probed the darkness with its mind. A moment later, it shook its head. No elven presence. Relieved, Ethan clipped a flashlight from his gear belt and flipped it on. The narrow beam pierced only a short way into the black. He swallowed his unease and stepped forward. The tunnel constricted at once, forcing him to crouch. With a clang, the dark crow, his raven-shaped weapon, tumbled from his pack onto the beast's broad back. At Ethan's mental command, it flew up and fell into formation beside him. Together, they pressed deeper into the silence, the flashlight's glow bobbing ahead like a lone guiding star. Ethan had been winding through the tunnel for several minutes when the passage suddenly opened up. The stifling, cave-like gloom lifted, revealing a vast chamber cut entirely from dark stone. He quickened his pace, and in just about 5 minutes reached its farthest corner. Apart from the rough walls and scattered boulders, there was nothing here. No signs of life, no hidden alcoves. "This can't just be a normal cave," he muttered to himself, brows furrowed. At that moment, his silent companion, a squat, animal-like creature, nipped gently at Ethan's trousers and fixed him with pleading eyes. It jabbed a stubby finger toward a section of the wall and let out a low, urgent whine. Ethan followed its gaze. Embedded in the stone overhead hung a stalactite as thick as a man's forearm. From its tip clung a single perfect drop of viscous, milky white liquid. It didn't fall. It merely hung, round and glistening, as if suspended by invisible threads. A subtly sweet, fresh scent drifted from it, barely noticeable beyond a meter. No wonder he hadn't detected it sooner. Heart pounding, Ethan whispered, Could it really be heart milk?" Earthcore milk is one of the choicest treasures of the elven realms, a pure distillate of nature, condensed over months to concentrate its rich energies and minerals. Taken on its own, it fortifies an elf's strength and physical defenses. When crafted into an energy block alongside other materials, its power multiplies. Humans can drink it too, warding off disease, boosting endurance, prolonging life, and sharpening overall fitness. Every so often, small vials of Earthcore milk appear on the redemption list. The last time they showed up, they sold out in under a minute, and at a staggering 1,000 points per drop. Factions and noble houses covet its life-extending properties so fiercely that nobody parts with it lightly unless they're desperate for cash. Ethan remembered how, in his past life, he'd watched an entire batch vanish almost before the listing went live. A single drop takes months to form, and yields are vanishingly small. He sighed softly, letting the thought pass without comment. Ethan crouched in the dim cavern, watching his hulking beast companion. The creature's normally vacant eyes began to glow a soft blue as it flexed its massive shoulders. With surprising gentleness, it lifted a pot-sized boulder, revealing dozens of delicate sacs clinging to its underside like pearl-studded stalactites. The instant the rock moved, a heady fragrance flooded the air, sweet, rich, and utterly intoxicating. Ethan felt every trace of tension drain from his body as he stared, mesmerized. One by one, the sacs snapped free and plummeted into the shallow pool of milky liquid on the cavern floor. Each orb landed with a muted thud, sending gentle ripples across the surface, but not a single drop escaped. He swallowed hard, unable to believe his eyes. Never before had he encountered so many condensed essence cores in one place. Each translucent sphere shimmered faintly, as if holding a fragment of starlight. His mouth went dry, and in the stunned silence the soft plink of his own drool hitting the stone was the only sound. Snapping himself back to reality, Ethan drew several empty flasks and jars from his belt. "Clean these," he said. The dull beast bent its head and licked the vessels one by one, scrubbing away every smear. Then his shadow crow familiar swooped in, its ebony wings a blur as it hovered, beating away every last bead of moisture until the glass shone clear. Now, with his containers spotless and bone-dry, Ethan was ready to harvest the precious cores. Ethan carefully withdrew the small metal spoon he'd been using to craft energy cubes and dipped it into the shimmering black emulsion. Scooping a measure of the so-called Earth's breast milk into a clear glass vial, he watched the viscous fluid swirl inside. That's when he saw it, a tiny, pale egg suspended in the depths of the liquid. His heart skipped. How long had this primordial milk been stashed in these caverns, and all that time an elven egg lay preserved within it? He remembered the faint claw marks and shallow digs around the cave entrance from his first exploration. Had an elf hidden it here for safekeeping? And after who knew how many years, could anything still be alive inside that shell? At first, all Ethan detected was a cracked eggshell drifting in the dark emulsion. His cybernetic scanning chip whirred, but couldn't pull any readings. Unfazed, Ethan held the vial steady and continued pouring in more of the black fluid. As the level dropped, the egg's full contours emerged, glowing softly in the murky liquid. Then, almost at once, the scanning chip sprang to life. Data cascaded across his HUD, genetic markers, magical signatures, even fragments of ancient elven lore. This wasn't just any incubated egg, it was a perfectly preserved repository of elven heritage. Ethan's breath caught as he realized the magnitude of his discovery. Deep within this simple glass bottle lay a living link to a vanished world, and with it, the power to reshape his own. Ethan stared in disbelief at the egg's status screen. The spoon in his hand clattered to the floor as he absorbed every line of data. Species, elf egg, lineage, appearance, cyan shell, unhatched, gender, male, level 1, type rock ground, characteristic, perseverance. Held item, essence of breast milk, innate moves, dragon dance, inverse scale, primal force, invisible rock, basic moves, bite, stare, taught moves, none, skill learner, none. He blinked, struggling to reconcile this discovery with everything he'd observed, the claw marks at the cave's entrance, the unusually large maw carved into the rock. None of it had made sense until now. This wasn't some random elf egg hidden in the grotto. It was a descendant of Kira. And Kira's lineage was nothing to underestimate. A single creature born with dragon dance and inverse scale, already encoded in its genes, spoke volumes about its parentage. Add to that primal force and invisible rock, and it meant this egg harbored the potential to shatter expectations. If this near-divine offspring matured as its pedigree suggested, it would rival the strength of a demigod and edge dangerously close to the power of a true heavenly king. Ethan's heart pounded with both awe and apprehension. Nurturing this egg to maturity could change the balance of the world forever. Yet he knew that, once it hatched, there would be no turning back. Ethan swiped across the chip's display again, puzzled by the status line under the elf egg. Non-hatchable. In all the time he'd relied on the chip's blessings that had once awakened a quasi-god elf in his former life as Aoki Aki, he'd never encountered such a warning. If the egg were dead, the note would make sense. But this shell throbbed with such vibrant life that it almost seemed to hum beneath his fingers. He eased the egg from its cradle of fertile loam and set it down on a soft cloth at his feet. Its once milky surface now glowed with a pale, steady light, reminiscent of the nourishing energy that had incubated it. Around him, dark feathered ravens stirred, and the mute forest beasts drifted closer, drawn by the same pull. As an elf hybrid himself, Ethan felt their curiosity and their alarm. Beneath the shell, he sensed a tiny heartbeat and a well of sorrow that he couldn't explain. A dim ache of loss seeped outward, brushing at his senses. One of the mute creatures paused, tilting its round pink head as if to share in his worry. Ethan knelt beside the egg, determination settling over him. Whatever this mysterious life was and whatever grief it carried, he wouldn't abandon it now. Ethan watched the mute beast's movements with quiet fascination. It seemed to know exactly what to do. Gently, the creature rested its head against the shimmering elven egg cradled at its side, then reached out and took Ethan's hand, guiding it toward the animal's flank. With its other paw, it beckoned to the dark crow perched nearby, as if inviting it to join them. Without a second thought, Ethan laid his hand against the beast's smooth, midnight black hide. The moment his fingers brushed its fur, the world around them blurred, and then everything changed. Chapter 52, The Great Bangla. Ethan stepped out of the darkness of the cave and was momentarily blinded by the midday sun. Before him lay a vibrant meadow, alive with wildflowers and birdsong. A murder of crows wheeled overhead, and a drooling beast grazed lazily among the blossoms. It was a scene of tranquil beauty, until the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. From the meadow's edge rose a colossal figure clad in pale green armor. As she strode forward, a fierce wind whipped the earth, lifting golden sand into the air. What had been lush grass and blooming trees was swallowed by a roaring sandstorm. Within moments, the entire meadow was lost beneath drifting dunes. With a deafening roar, the armored being completed her transformation. Spikes jutted from her shoulders and back, and a faint emerald glow pulsed beneath her armor. She was Bangla, the sandstorm elf, the ultimate evolution of Kira, quasi-god among gods. Under her command, the very landscape had bent to her will and become a desert. Bangla walked to the crest of a high dune, and without another sound, sank to her knees. Time seemed to fold in on itself. Suns rose and set, moons waxed and waned, yet she remained perfectly still. Her usual ferocity had given way to an almost meditative calm. Ethan watched from the edge of the storm, awestruck and wary. Before he could summon the courage to step closer, movement flickered on the distant horizon, figures advancing toward Bangla's silent vigil. Uninvited guests had come to this newly formed desert, and Ethan's heart pounded with both dread and excitement. Ethan watched from the sand as a dozen Harugas emerged on the ridge, their dark forms silhouetted against the sun-baked horizon. The moment they spotted Bangla, they charged without hesitation. Clearly they'd waited for just this opportunity. For nearly a month, Ethan and Bangla had lain low in this desert basin, surviving on scant provisions. Childbirth had already drained Bangla's strength to its limits, and a self-imposed fast since then had left him weaker than Ethan had ever seen him. Yet when the Harugas leapt forward, Bangla rose to his feet with no sign of fear. In a single, fluid motion, he thrust his hands skyward, and a shockwave of power blasted the attackers backward, sending them tumbling into the dry earth. Heart pounding, Ethan hurried over to where Bangla had been kneeling. There, carved into the sand by the divine force of that discharge, was a shallow pit. Nestled at its center lay an elf egg, its shell glowing with a pale yellow light. Ethan's breath caught. It was identical to the elven eggs they'd discovered in the ancient vaults. So this was why Bangla had remained here for so long, here, on this barren cradle of wilderness, to bear and protect this egg, to bring a new life into the world. The ordeal of childbirth had left him spent, and the month of fasting had pushed his quasi-god form to its lowest ebb since his ascension. Ethan straightened, scanning the ridge where the Harugas regrouped. Their timing had been deliberate. They'd pounced precisely when Bangla was at his weakest, hoping to topple him from his divine perch. But as Bangla stood, steadying himself against the weight of exhaustion, Ethan realized that no matter how frail his friend appeared, he would not be so easily cast down, and not while that precious life depended on him. Together, they raised their eyes to the horizon, prepared for whatever came next. Ethan's true power far exceeded anything his foes could have imagined, especially here, in the desert that was his home. After a relentless day and night of fighting, he finally laid every last Haruga to rest beneath the shifting sands. But victory carried a bitter toll. In the heat of battle, he had been forced to abandon his children's safety, and now, as he returned to the bunker he'd occupied for the past month, he discovered the worst possible outcome. The delicate shell of his unborn child's elven egg lay cracked. Anger, despair, confusion, and grief crashed over him in waves. He knelt beside the egg, ring through the fracture lines into the faint glow of life within. Even wounded as he was, he could sense its vitality ebbing. A single tear slipped from his fierce eyes and traced the crack, as if begging the egg to hold together. Time lost all meaning as Ethan remained by the egg's side. Sunrise gave way to sunset, and still he refused to leave. At last, his body aching from wounds and exhaustion, he rose, cradling the fragile orb against his chest. Grief still shadowed his gaze, but determination shone through. He would not let this life slip away. Ignoring the pain that throbbed through every muscle, Ethan set out once more across the desert dunes. With each faltering step, he whispered promises to the silent egg. Though he was a near-immortal warrior who had faced countless armies, never before had he confronted an enemy so relentless and so close to his heart. All that stood between his child and oblivion was his unwavering will to save it. Through Bagheera's eyes, she sensed the raw guilt and self-reproach simmering beneath the surface. In an instant, the vision shifted. A sprawling stone forest rose into view, its jagged pillars eerily familiar to Ethan, capped by the boundless expanse of the first-line sky. Although her steps momentarily wavered, Bagheera's demi-divine presence remained undeniable, and every elf along the path hastily made way. When she reached the front line, her eyes dimmed as if she'd lost all vestige of glory. Then, almost at once, they reignited with purpose. A faint, joyous light played across her features as she pressed forward into the first-line sky. Halfway through a narrow cave hewn into the mountainside, she came to a halt. As a demigoddess of earth and shadow, Bagheera possessed an uncanny attunement to stone far beyond that of common rock spawn. From deep within the cavern, she felt a subtle resonance, proof that what she sought lay just beyond. But the tunnel's mouth was far too tight for her to enter. Cradling the precious elven egg in one arm, she laid her other hand against the rock wall, and with talons honed sharper than any blade, began to carve. Under Bagheera's divine strength, the granite yielded like soft clay. In mere moments, she had hollowed out an archway just large enough for her to slip through. And there, in the dim light beyond the opening, stood a solitary figure, so uncannily like Ethan that for a heartbeat she wondered if it could truly be him. Filled with both hope and dread, Bagheera hurried to the exposed pool of geosperm. The earth core milk gleamed silver white, its magical currents flowing freely over the stone. As a rock spirit, she revered its latent power. With trembling hands, she withdrew the elven egg she had guarded for so long. What had once been a lustrous crystal-silver shell was now dull and rough, etched with tiny fractures. Gently, she pressed it to her cheek. "There's so much I wish I could understand about you, Ethan," she whispered, "but my love for you has never wavered." Summoning every ounce of courage, Bagheera turned and carefully submerged the egg in the pool. Instantly, the geosperm surged up, enveloping the fragile shell in its luminous embrace. She stood motionless, heart-pounding, watching for any sign of renewed life. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a faint glow from within. Then the light faded completely. The egg went still. A wrenching sob broke free as Bagheera lifted the lifeless shell from the milky waters. Cradling her lost child against her heart, she let her grief wash over her at last. Bagheera's knees finally gave out beneath her. Her body shook with exhaustion, from the agony of childbirth, the brutal fight that followed, and the heart-pounding fear of losing her newborn. Even a quasi-deity like her had limits. Teeth gritted, she summoned the last of her strength to cover the surface of the earth core spring with heavy stones. With a final clatter, the barrier sealed tight, and she slumped to the ground, relief softening her features before weariness claimed her once more. If she had simply drunk a draught of the enchanted earth core milk, every wound would have vanished, and as a rock spirit, the magic would even have elevated her to the next tier of power. But Bagheera never hesitated for a moment. She knew that for her son Ethan to survive, the spring had to remain perfectly sealed. A single crack would let the life-giving waters leak away, and with them, his chance at life. So she sacrificed herself without a thought. As the magic of the spring pulsed beneath the stones, Bagheera's flesh began to crystallize into stone. Slowly, her form turned to rock, her final breath an offering to her child's future. There, beside the sealed spring, she waits in petrified silence, her heart forever tethered to the day Ethan will awaken and claim the life she fought so hard to give him. The light shifted, and Ethan's eyelids fluttered open. Through the beast's telepathic link, he and the elder Bengala were shown the origin and unfolding of the elven egg's power. Ethan turned his gaze to the fragile egg Kira had entrusted to him, and an overwhelming surge of protective, almost maternal love washed over him. Beside him, the drowsy creature and the dark-feathered crow watched in silence. Crystalline sparks danced in their eyes, but even under that mesmerizing glow, Ethan stood his ground, unshaken and resolute. Ethan crouched beside the smooth stones, pressing his palm against their cool surface. A gentle chill seeped through his skin, and for a fleeting moment, a profound sense of calm washed over him. He shook his head, dispelling the illusion, then carefully lifted Kira's hand, and the elven egg cradled within it. A hairline crack marred the shell, but to Ethan's relief, it was sealed tight. A pale, glimmering film, Earth's core milk, had condensed across the fracture, its ancient magic knitting the egg back together. As a legendary elixir of longevity, this sacred substance would not only mend the shell, but also replenish the vitality Kira had sacrificed. Ethan felt the egg pulse with renewed life. He drew a steady breath and murmured, "Great Mother, great nature." It was by sheer chance that he'd come upon this fragile elven egg, an object that might have been doomed without intervention. The layer of simmering heart milk coating the shell promised to restore every ounce of its life force. And if the egg truly hatched, Kira's innate gift for earth magic would burst forth like a torrent, reshaping her destiny forever. Ethan stared at the unhatched egg with a mixture of awe and frustration. The core milk's power was so immense that, over countless years, it had fused completely with the shell, making this near-divine elf egg impossible to crack open. The chip's diagnostics left no room for hope. The egg brimmed with vitality, but it would never hatch on its own. With a heavy heart, Shun handed the precious egg to his beast companion. "Guard it well," he said softly, "until we discover another way." Watching the creature cradle the egg, Ethan vowed not to give up. He would scour every library, consult every expert. He'd find a means, no matter how improbable, to free the life trapped inside. For now, he turned his attention to a more tangible task, collecting the ground milk that had settled at the bottom of the pond. This rare substance could be sold at the rocket's exchange center or traded with other factions for vast rewards Ethan intended to pour back into training his elves. It was a self-reinforcing cycle. The more resources he gathered, the stronger his forces would become, the more eggs he could hatch. And perhaps, one day, he'd crack open this one. By dusk, Ethan had filled 10 glass vials with the rich, silvery milk. He even emptied his spare water bottles to ensure not a single drop went to waste. Holding the vials up to the last light of day, he felt the familiar stir of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was determined to see it through. Egg, milk, and all. If Ethan redeemed all 10 bottles of heart milk for points, he could pocket almost 1,000,000 points in one go. Yet he couldn't bring himself to do it. He felt it would be reckless to advertise the full extent of his reserves, especially now when his life hung by a thread and his strength was waning. No matter how tempting the payoff, letting others know how well stocked he was could prove disastrous in the long run. That said, he wasn't above redeeming a few bottles in exchange for vital resources. Doing so would solve his biggest worry once the elves were subdued, a crippling shortage of supplies. From this moment on, any elf who met his exacting standards would face his conquest. His first objective was clear: to secure the combat power of the 6 leading elf commanders. Of course, he wouldn't accept recruits lightly. Only those whose qualifications and temperaments passed his rigorous criteria would make the cut. Ethan slipped all 10 bottles of heart milk into the pouch at his belt and exhaled. At least these bottles had spared him the extra time and trouble of rushing off to finish the task. Now, with his secret stash safely hidden, he could move forward with complete focus. Ethan paused as he cradled the vial of earth core milk in his palm. "This stuff isn't just a medicine," he mused. "If I find a powerful rock or ground-type spirit and use it as a catalyst, its strength could be unbelievable." For a moment, he considered diverting from his mission just to capture one of those rare elves, but he shook his head. Not yet. First, he'd finish the task at hand. If a worthy specimen crossed his path, he'd deal with it then. Tapping a command on his interface, Ethan stepped out onto the rocky plain in search of an exceptional rock-type spirit. But what he found were only low-grade stone creatures, tiny fist-sized golems and scuttling earth critters, not the majestic elves he'd hoped for. None of them met his standards, so he pressed on, determined to wait for something truly remarkable. Still, there was a spark of anticipation in his chest. If Kira's egg could hatch, who better to guide it than a quasi-divine rock-type ally? With that thought, Ethan reached into his rocket belt and produced a compact elf egg incubator. He'd packed it just in case he ever stumbled onto one of those giant sting bee elf eggs again, like the one he'd encountered last time. He almost laughed at his own luck. Before he'd set out today, he never imagined Yuki would actually yield elf eggs so readily. They couldn't hatch right now, but that was only a temporary delay. Nothing to say they wouldn't break open and reveal new life in the days to come. With the incubator secured and his resolve firm, Ethan pressed onward, ready for whatever lay ahead. Ethan stared at the strange eggs before him, each one sheathed in a pitch-white shell laced with a viscous, milk-like substance. If he could somehow siphon off that fluid without hurting the elves inside, or simply weaken the shell's integrity, these eggs might hatch safely. He tapped his forehead, sending a surge of mental energy to his bonded beast hovering nearby. Elven eggs can't go into storage space, he reminded himself. So you'll have another job. Hold the incubator for me at all times. His companion, a hulking, telepathic creature, nodded. Metaphorically, at least. Ethan had to admit, using his gift to keep the eggs cradled and warm was a remarkable way to sharpen his superhuman abilities on the fly. Lifting off, they emerged above the jagged skyline of the stone forest. Ethan gazed down at the myriad boulders dotting the landscape, each one oddly small and pale. Their mineral aura was faint. No wonder none of them had reached a high level of refinement. He remembered the cavern he'd explored the day before, deep in the heart of the forest. That hidden grotto teemed with the mysterious core milk, a potent energy that seeped into the surrounding soil and enriched the rocks themselves. Those stones, fed by this essence, grew dense and powerful, but only within the cave's protective walls. That explained the rock serpent he'd encountered, a massive, level 30 creature that basked for hours on the cave's sunlit ledge. It lingered there because the minerals drawn from the core milk were far richer than what lay out among the smaller pillars. Ethan folded his wings, eyes narrowed in determination. If he could harness even a fraction of that core milk here outside the cave, he might crack open those elf eggs without harm, and give the next generation of elves a fighting chance. He glanced at his beast, now cradling the incubator with unwavering focus. Let's get to work. The massive stone serpents feed on the mineral-rich boulders here, their bodies growing rapidly with each fragment they swallow. In time, they've come to crave these living rocks, returning to the same feeding grounds day after day. It's one of nature's paradoxes. The harshest, coldest places often yield the purest, most potent forces, while the brightest, most tranquil spots can conceal the darkest dangers. Such is the stone forest. Its surface hides extremely rare minerals, but in its deepest clefts, the earth itself produces the richest geoseeds. This, more than any elven spell or enchantment, is nature's true magic. A narrow rift in the sky marks the way in, Ethan reminded his companions, tracing the route on his map. He had only just shaken off the lingering influence of Bangila's Grand Matron, and now he set out again, this time accompanied by the D, Ark Crow, and the Foolish Beast, to complete his latest assignment. Originally promised 10,000 merit points, Ethan's reward had been slashed to a handful of tokens once he claimed the heart of the earth. Still, he refused to turn back. Success here was his only ticket into the elusive Shadow mission. 5 relentless days of marching through jagged stone and biting winds brought them at last to the shimmering fissure overhead. Beyond it lay the location marked on Ethan's map. Steeling himself, he stepped forward into the light and into whatever trials awaited. When Ethan saw their next mission was to explore yet another cave, he couldn't help laughing through his exasperation. Seriously? Another cave? Are we supposed to map every cavern on Trial Island? He grumbled as he trudged forward, but he trudged forward. Nobody's quitting just because the path goes underground. The moment they stepped into the cavern, Ethan's foot caught on a loose stone, sending it skittering across the floor. That tiny clatter was enough to rouse a cluster of supersonic bats roosting high above. With ear-splitting shrieks, they dove toward the intruders. These weren't ordinary bats, though. They were venomous spirit beasts, capable of paralyzing an adventurer in seconds. Luckily, Ethan's own spirit companion, a hulking dumb beast, exuded a raw, dampening aura that sapped the bat's speed. Calling on his Beastmaster skill, Ethan swept his arms in wide, sweeping arcs. Gusts of wind scoured the chamber, sending dozens of bats crashing to the ground. Only a handful managed to escape, their venomous threat neutralized by the spirit beast's power. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and gave a wry smile. Well, that was exciting. Let's see what else this cave has in store. Chapter 54, ECG Induction, Part 3. The cavern floor was slick with moss and moisture. Every time Ethan set foot, the ground gave a wet snap, forcing him to watch his footing or risk sliding into the darkness. Then, a sudden shriek echoed ahead. A pale blue light flared in the beast's eyes. Whatever it was preparing to strike. The creature's scream sent a jolt through Ethan. The silence that followed felt wrong, Too oppressive, too absolute. This place wasn't like the arid, drafty caverns of Bangla that only the hardiest elves dared explore. Here, the damp chill clung to his skin, and he could think of very few elves who'd willingly brave an environment so cold and wet. Except for that initial swarm of supersonic bats at the entrance, he'd encountered no other life. Now, guided by the beast's warning call, he peered deeper into the gloom. Before him, a swirl of violet mist began to coalesce, drifting forward like living smoke. In moments, it formed a dark, hovering sphere. 2 luminous orbs dominated its upper half, and below them yawned a jagged mouth lined with sharp fangs. Ethan's breath caught. Floating in the cave's chill air was Ghastly, the gas Pokémon, a dual poison ghost type known for its mischievous pranks. Even at rest, its eerie presence set every hair on his arms on end. He squared his shoulders. In the fading purple glow, Ethan could sense only one thing. This ghostly trickster was about to make its move. Ethan's elven heritage made him exquisitely sensitive to phantom energies, so the moment the ghosts manifested and brimmed with malicious intent, he sensed them. "Now," he whispered. With a sudden rustle of feathers, the dark crow, Ethan's loyal spirit beast, unfurled its obsidian wings, dispersing the swirling purple mist that clung to the phantoms. Unfazed by the ghost's arrival, the crow settled before Ethan in a menacing arc of shadow. Evil spirits like Dark Crow were naturally immune to ghostly powers. Even a surprise attack from the spectral realm couldn't faze it. The lead ghost let out a mocking cackle. "Ha!" It sneered at Dark Crow, then at Ethan. "You're so flimsy." Ethan watched impassively, his lips curling into a faint, wry smile. "Pathetic," he murmured under his breath. Raising his hand, he summoned his power. An enormous, invisible fist materialized out of the ether and lunged forward. "Foolish creature, taste my grasp!" In an instant, the level 16 ghost, a vaporous form of pure spectral gas, was yanked from the air. Its body, never meant to be touched by any being except its bonded spirit, recoiled as though struck by fire. A keening scream tore from the phantom's lips. "Ha!" The captured ghost writhed in agony, its smoky essence flickering violently under Ethan's merciless hold. Emotionless, he tightened his grip until the wail finally cut off, and the mist collapsed into stillness. Ethan's lips curled into a grin as the cavern walls echoed with ghostly laughter. "Ha ha!" Around him, dozens of specters materialized, eyes glowing fiercely. Yet none dared advance. Ethan's relentless energy wave repelled them all. As their ranks swelled, he leaned back on his heels, amused. Well now, never expected to stumble into a ghost cavern. He felt no fear. At his side stood the massive beast, muscles coiled beneath shaggy fur, and the sleek dark crow, its feathers like spilled ink. With those two, and his own blink skill, Ethan was more than prepared. "Grah!" the beast roared, pounding the earth with a paw the size of a dinner table. "Call!" the crow screeched, flapping its wings so hard the very air trembled. The ghosts lunged, but the beast barreled forward in a furious charge, and the crow's razor-sharp feathers sliced through the nearest wraiths. Dozens of apparitions reeled back, stunned by the display of raw power. A heavy crackle of tension filled the air. Then, from the swirling mass of phantoms, a single figure broke free. It drifted forward with deliberate slowness, its shape more defined, its aura strangely serene compared to the others. As it emerged into the flickering torchlight, Ethan tensed. This was no common ghost. Something about it felt eerily familiar. He straightened, ready for whatever came next. The cavern held its breath. Ethan stepped forward, and the chorus of ghostly wails abruptly fell silent. A cold hush descended over the restless spirits. Then, without warning, an ancient voice resonated in Ethan's mind. "Greetings, young human." Startled, Ethan glanced around at the phantoms. In his vision, the faint outline of a black interface glimmered. His chip was scanning them. He shook his head, forcing himself to stay calm. "Are you the one speaking?" he asked aloud. A single ghost drifted forward and inclined its head. The voice returned in Ethan's thoughts. "Yes, your companion is strong. If you choose to fight, it benefits neither our kind nor yours." This elder spirit spoke with perfect clarity, no garbled echoes or static interference. Ethan nodded, then tapped his wrist-mounted chip. A translucent data window unfolded before his eyes. Name Ghost, gender male, level 28 poison, ability levitate. Held item, none. Signature moves, ghostly visage, immobilize, Standard moves: Dread Gaze, Hex, Nightshade, Confuse Ray, Shadow Ball, Feint Attack. TMHM moves: Frighten, Spirit Pulse, Haze, Deception. Tutor moves: none. Ethan studied the readout. A level 28 ghost type, still in its base form, but clearly not to be underestimated. He met the specter's pale eyes, determination hardening in his chest. Whatever this spirit wanted, he was ready to negotiate or defend himself. Ethan studied the ghost's readout on his handheld scanner. Something about this spirit felt different. Not a young apparition, but an ancient immortal. He didn't let his surprise show. "I need to go inside and retrieve something," he told the specter quietly. "Once I have it, I'll be on my way." The ghost hovered in the darkness, its features indistinct but its presence unmistakable. Ethan met its gaze without flinching. He preferred honesty to subterfuge. Immediately, a calm, resonant voice echoed inside his mind. "Agree to a simple favor for us, and not only will you pass unmolested, I'll even help you locate what you seek." Ethan hesitated only a moment. The cavern beyond them was pitch black. He couldn't see his own hand in front of his face, and its vastness was impossible to gauge. Without assistance, he might wander indefinitely. Still, he refused to bargain under duress. "I'm going in. You won't stop me," he said, tone steady. The ancient spirit's form flickered, as if weighing the cost of unrest. After a pregnant pause, that same gentle voice filled his thoughts once more. "Our reward will be more than worth your trouble." Ethan felt the weight of centuries behind the ghost's words. After nearly a millennium, it had seen enough cunning and enough loyalty to know which humans were truly resolute. He squared his shoulders and stepped forward into the inky blackness, determined to find his prize on his own terms. Ethan leaned back, regarding the assembled elves with contempt. To him, humans were inherently greedy, but for the right price, there was nothing they wouldn't do. He tapped a slender finger on the table. "That's not enough," he declared. The comment cut through the murmurs. Ethan wasn't playing by the usual rules, and he knew it. He was about to make an even bolder demand when a flash of anger crossed Lao Guisi's face. Ethan caught it in an instant and allowed a cold smile to spread across his features. He nodded toward the silent, regal beast at his side. "Teach him electrostatic induction." A stunned hush fell over the chamber. Guisi had expected any number of outlandish orders from the human, but never this. Among elves, mastering electrostatic induction, drawing and shaping raw electric energy, was so difficult it was said to rival the feat of ascending to the heavens. Even those who'd trained their spirit power for thousands of years often failed to grasp it fully. Yet in this world of superpower, D-elves, renowned both for staggering magical might and shrewd intellect, such abilities were not unheard of. These elves walked hand in hand with wonders that defied imagination, their cleverness rivaling that of humankind itself. Guisi had already suspected that the small pink elf standing beside Ethan belonged to this rare caste. His senses warned him its power was tremendous. Still, he found himself baffled. If this creature's potential was so immense, why had it never learned electrostatic induction? He bit back his questions. For now, he would grant Ethan's request, and with it, set in motion forces that would change everything. Chapter 55. Gengguan, Wed. Ethan had been wrestling with the same question ever since he discovered the foolish beast's latent powers. By all rights, it should take almost no effort for such a creature to pick up ECG, but for some reason, the beast remained incapable, and Ethan himself didn't know how to help. His luck changed, however, when he met a ghost with the rare gift of telepathic sensitivity. With that ability on their side, teaching the foolish beast would finally become possible. "All right," the ghost said coolly. This time Guisi seemed remarkably unruffled. After all, it wasn't a great feat to impart ECG to a creature predisposed to it. No lengthy rituals, no complex incantations, just a bit of guided telepathy. As soon as Guisi consented, Ethan relaxed. He had half expected the ghost to demand a terrible price, perhaps even the life of a lion. While the beast's power could theoretically be wrested from his entire family, the cost would be ruinous. Ethan hoped instead that the ghost would set them a manageable task, something within their own reach. Guisi cleared his throat and spoke softly, choosing his words. "I've dwelt in this place for many years. I've seen only a handful of humans, and they're always passing through, until recently. A new face appeared not long ago." At the mention of that stranger, a flicker of memory passed through Kosi's expression. He closed his eyes, recalling the sight of a flat wooden boat adrift on dark waters. Then he opened his eyes again, voice low and urgent. That human. Ethan's companion, Guisi, swallowed hard. He's unbelievably powerful, far stronger than you could ever imagine. I met Guisi's gaze, expression unreadable. From a distance I dared to look at him, Guisi went on, voice trembling, but I never got close. Still, he knew I was there. I waited. He placed something right at the center of our old settlement, and then it disappeared. Guisi's hands shook. We thought that was it, but the thing began to siphon off the ghost system energy in these caves. He paused to draw a steadying breath. The longer it stayed, the more voracious its hunger. Before long, a tide of phantom energy poured through the caverns, forcing us to flee to the perimeter. Though his face remained calm, I sensed his desperation. Why not destroy it, I asked, or simply remove it? Guisi shook his head. That's why we need you. We can't get near it, but you can. I crossed my arms. You want me to go in and haul out whatever drained this entire system dry? Do you really think I'm the one who can do that? Ethan watched the old spirit's face, helpless yet determined. Follow me, it said softly. Once you see it, you'll understand. With a swift turn, the ghost beckoned him onward. Instantly, the throng of lesser phantoms parted, creating a narrow path. They jostled and made mocking faces as Ethan passed, but none dared to touch him. Ethan's skin was pale with tension, and he kept one hand close to the hilt of his dagger, while his other rested on the backs of the dark-feathered crows and the lumbering beasts that trailed behind him. Though these creatures looked menacing, he kept them in check by sheer will, and the old spirit made no move to stop him. It knew well the unruly nature of its own kind. Together they pressed into the cave, whose labyrinthine tunnels far outmatched those of the Banguila catacombs. Every few yards brought another fork, another winding passage. More than once, Ethan found himself backtracking, only to realize the ghost had already slipped ahead, patiently waiting for him. Finally, after weaving through dozens of split corridors, they emerged into a wide, hollow chamber. It wasn't plunged in darkness as Ethan had expected. Strange, luminescent fungi clung to the walls and floors, bathing the cavern in an unearthly, pale green glow. Crystalline veins ran like rivers of light across the stone, revealing a space at once alien and breathtakingly beautiful. The old spirit turned to Ethan, its ghostly features softening. This place, it whispered, is where secrets are kept. Secrets you must learn. And in that glowing stillness, Ethan steeled himself for what lay ahead. Ethan pushed through the narrow fissure and stepped into a grotto blanketed by glowing bryophyte, moss-like plants that bathed the chamber in an eerie, greenish light. At the mouth of the cave, Guisi froze, reluctant to go any farther. In Ethan's mind, the ancient voice of Ju Kang whispered once more. This was where we once lived. Ever since that thing appeared, none of us have dared to return. He followed Guisi's gaze to the heart of the cavern. There, atop a rough-hewn stone dais, floated an orb of shimmering crystal, an elf ball, imbued with its own faint radiance. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He'd heard rumors that this relic was tied to the Shadow Lieutenant of the Rocket Shadow Corps, a being so powerful that even Guisi trembled at the thought of him. And yet here, the orb lay unprotected, lonely on its pedestal. A single thought crystallized in Ethan's mind. This must be the quest item. If Guisi wouldn't venture closer, Ethan would have to retrieve it himself. He squared his shoulders and advanced. Above him, the dark crow wheeled silently, while the foolish beasts padded behind, their eyes darting through the mossy gloom for any sign of danger. Ethan's willingness to trust Guisi sprang partly from the elves' straightforward nature. Unlike humans, who often hide their true feelings behind polite smiles or carefully chosen words, an elf's spirit is usually exactly what it seems. If they like you, they show it. If they don't, you know at once. Even though Guisi had lived for centuries and picked up a few human mannerisms and phrases, he remained an elf through and through. He'd spent little time among people and was entirely unaware of how impossible it was for him to hide his innate elven habits. The other reason Ethan believed him was simple confidence in his own strength. If a fight ever turned deadly, he knew he could vanish in an instant and escape unscathed. As for the reward Lao Guisi had dangled in front of him, it meant very little to Ethan. In a place this barren, there was nothing here that truly tempted him. After all, treasures like the heartfruit and the heart's milk were incredibly rare, and it was almost unheard of to find both so close together. Ethan stepped into the chamber with deliberate calm, his eyes never wavering from the stone pillar at its center. Embedded in the pillar was a single Pokeball, its surface bearing Team Rocket's ominous red R. As it slid into the scanner's beam, the device on Ethan's wrist buzzed to life. A faint glow traced the contours of the Pokeball, and lines of data illuminated his chip's display. Pokémon, Gengar, Light Cyan. Gender, male, level 48. Type, Ghost, Poison. Ability, Cursed Body Held Item, none. Genetic moves, Ghost Form, Flame Punch, Frighten, Taunt. Basic moves, Hypnosis, Lick, Wrath, Mean Look, Hex, Nightshade, Strange Light, Assault, Reciprocity, Shadow Ball, Dream Eater, Dark Wave. TMHM moves, Thief, Deception, Ultimate Absorption, Fire Fist move. Tutor moves, Sleep Talk, Protect, Dream Words, Poison Sting, Aqua Awakening, 100,000 volts. Ethan's hand tightened on the scanner's grip. "This is Shadow's personal Pokémon?" he whispered, almost to himself. The breadth of Gengar's skill set, especially the high-cost moves taught and learned, meant only one thing. Someone with extraordinary resources had prepared this battle-ready monster. And now it lay waiting for its next command. Aside from the island's abundance of high-aptitude poison serpents, the only other wild Pokémon here were ghosts. Since Ethan had been sent on a movie shoot assignment, it was obvious these ghostly figures were nothing more than stunt doubles, actors in spectral costumes. He allowed himself a small sigh of relief. As a champion-class trainer, Ethan could tell at a glance that Gengar's strength didn't come close to the Shadow League's top echelon. At best, it ranked in the second tier. In Team Rocket's appraisal system, a pale cyan rating signifies top-tier aptitude. Among trainers everywhere, Pokémon with such a rating are universally regarded as the cream of the crop. If you really want to measure how much one tier outclasses another at the same level, use a 50th level red tier elf as your baseline. A 50th level orange tier elf can overpower 8 red tier elves. A yellow tier can defeat 8 oranges, a green tier 8 yellows, and by the time you reach cyan tier, a single elf could theoretically handle nearly 10,000 red tier opponents. Of course, these numbers assume ideal conditions. No elf possesses unlimited stamina, so they're purely theoretical. In practice, as long as a higher tier elf still has energy in reserve, large numbers of lower tier foes simply make no difference. That's the crushing power of tier disparity. Still, there are always exceptions. A skilled trainer's tactical commands can turn the tide. Elemental strengths and weaknesses sometimes allow a lower-tier elf to gain the upper hand. And the occasional upset, when the seemingly weaker combatant emerges victorious, remains one of the great fascinations of the elven world. In theory, when two elves share nearly identical aptitudes and grades, no amount of training can push a lower rank, red grade, elf past one of a higher rank, green grade. But putting that aside, if someone deliberately placed this Ghost here, Old Geese's warning suddenly clicks into place. From the moment it appeared, it began siphoning off the local ghost energy. That must be why it came. According to the Elder Spirits, this area once brimmed with potent ectoplasmic energy, more than enough to sustain their entire clan. There were even a handful of high-caliber spirits on the verge of evolving into ghost stones. Then the Ghost arrived, and the tide turned. The overall energy reserves plummeted so drastically that some spirits who had already become ghost stones even regressed back to mere ghosts. Anyone who rises only to be forced back down by external forces suffers a severe blow to their very foundation. What's worse, Gangui, this so-called ultimate evolution of ghost and ghost stone, hovers above them all, choking off every last drop of energy. And make no mistake, this isn't just any Gangui, it's in a class of its own. Ethan's rating had just climbed into the Cyan tier, a level typically reserved for the highest red-ranked entities. None of the lingering spirits in the cavern could muster the strength to resist him. To escape Geng's energy-draining aura, the ghosts streamed out into the forest beyond. True, the ambient spirit energy there was fleeting, but it was better than none. Kneeling at the mouth of the cave, Ethan reached for the small orb stamped with an R. He flipped the switch on its side, sealing Geng's essence inside. Only with that safeguard in place could he begin to absorb the residual ectoplasmic energy without risking the spirit's escape. The moment Ethan lifted the orb from its recess, a tendril of ink-black mist curled out of the hollow where it had rested. He leaned in, curious. Was this dense, churning vapor phantom energy? To test it, he guided the floating mist toward the orb. Almost before he could blink, the vapor was drawn straight in. Through the orb's semi-translucent shell, Ethan watched Geng's spirit curled comfortably within, greedily slurping up the freshly acquired energy. Ethan stared at the chip scan readout. Even Geng the ghost's data showed a slight uptick, barely perceptible, yet undeniably real. He paused. Was Geng here to advance his cultivation, or was he nursing some hidden injury? Beyond those two possibilities, Ethan could think of no other motive. He knew better than to assume Geng's appearance was a mere test, but it hardly mattered. Ethan's mission remained unchanged: retrieve the elven orb and leave. His gaze drifted to the massive stone pillar anchoring the cavern floor. It pulsed with an extraordinary reservoir of phantom energy, surely enough to sustain countless specters. The temptation to pry it free, to excavate its secrets, was strong, yet a moment's reflection dragged him back. Unlike the bustling Bangila caves, this hollow was lifeless. No animals, no vegetate, ion, nothing that might mask his work. Any significant disturbance here would attract too much attention. Ethan glanced at the silent ghosts arrayed at the cave's entrance. He knew the Guisi faction, their survival tied to the feng shui life treasure that emanated from this very pillar, would be the first to rebel if he so much as tapped it. After all, ghosts required no food. They lived solely on ambient phantom energy. One reckless move, and he'd threaten their lifeblood and ignite a conflict he had no desire to fight. Reluctantly, Ethan stepped away from the pillar. It would remain undisturbed. His only focus now was the elven orb. Ethan paused at the base of the monolithic stone pillar, its surface pulsing with a pale, greenish light. This living column was the heart of the mountain's phantom energy, an energy that the tribal specters here depended on for nourishment and growth. If the pillar were ever destroyed by that mysterious green wood, more than half of the ghostly populace would perish, and the survivors would be forever weakened. To tamper with it was to risk genocide. He'd heard the same warning from every corner of the ruins. If you touch it, the ghosts will rise up against you. They'd sooner die than let one intruder undo the only source of their life. And yet, even the formidable Shadow King, a warlord renowned for his ruthlessness and appetite for power, had backed away from the pillar. If someone of Shadow's caliber wouldn't dare disturb it, who was Ethan to press his luck? He exhaled slowly. Whatever promise this chamber held, it wasn't worth provoking the ghosts into all-out war, at least not today. Ethan knew too well how quickly hopes could turn to ashes in these cursed halls. His shoulders relaxed, and he closed his mind to further exploration for the moment, vowing that on a future expedition he would find what he'd come for. Retrieving the small, glowing orb from his pack, Ethan whispered the containment spell. The sphere shrank until it nestled neatly in the palm of his hand. This was the elven orb that housed the Geng Spectre, his prize and his protection. He clipped it into the specially crafted holder on his belt, listening to the orb's faint hum as it settled into place. With one last look at the humming pillar, Ethan turned away. He might have seemed a mere beast tamer to onlookers, but he knew better than to underestimate patience. Someday soon, he would return, and then he would claim his true reward. After Ethan seized Gengguai's spectral orb, a bold phantom drifted over, drawn by the thickening swirl of ectoplasmic energy. As the ghost inhaled, its translucent form glowed brighter, every particle of its being renewed by the very power ghosts crave. At Ethan's side, however, the dull beast, a lumbering, slow-witted creature, stirred uneasily. Ever since the orb had changed hands, the spirit energy had begun to radiate outward, subjecting the beast to a pressure it could not endure. It was like watching a block of ice slowly soften in warming water. "Thank you, human youth," the elder spirit murmured, its voice echoing like a distant breeze. Ethan noticed the dull beast's discomfort and gave a subtle nod. Instantly, the phantom understood and glided after him toward the cavern's entrance. No sooner had they crossed the threshold then the oppressive aura that had constricted the dull beast's muscles dissipated. The creature finally exhaled, its rigid tension melting away under the cool air. Ethan drew in a slow breath, bracing himself for whatever came next. After a heartbeat of silence, Lao Guisi's voice, not quite audible but unmistakably inside his head, spoke with a restless eagerness. "Human teenager, now it's your turn. Tell me what you wish to find." Ethan frowned, puzzled by the spirit's sudden intensity. Was Lao Guisi simply impatient for him to finish so they could part ways? Or was the entity craving another infusion of phantom energy that might be released the moment Ethan named his desire? His own reserves felt dangerously low. He weighed his words carefully, then said, almost on a whim, "Have you ever heard of a palm-sized stone that holds an enormous amount of elemental power? Fire, water, electricity, anything? A single rock carrying energy beyond belief." Silence stretched on for a few seconds, broken only by the faint hum of the spirit world brushing against his mind. Ethan's heart pounded. If such a stone existed, finding it could tip the balance in his favor, and maybe, just maybe, fill the void inside him. Chapter 57, Dark Stones, Part 3. Ethan hadn't wanted to take advantage of the ghosts. Despite their eerie, sinister appearance, after all his time interacting with them, he'd come to realize they weren't so different from other elves. Honest, if a little more reserved. When he mentioned the evolution stones, his plan was simple. He would reveal his own stones at the right moment, regardless of whether the ghosts had already discovered them. That way, he'd secure the quest items he needed and at the same time enable the wild beasts he trained to adapt to their power. It felt like a perfect solution. He hadn't expected the ghosts to surprise him first. As he finished speaking, Old Ghost, who'd been lurking in a shadowy corner of the cave, stepped forward. 2 black stones materialized before Ethan, suspended in midair by the ghost's will. You're talking about these stones?" Old Ghost asked, voice echoing against the rock walls. Ethan stared, utterly speechless. He'd planned to produce his own evolution stones when the moment was right. He certainly hadn't counted on the ghosts having their own. 2 dark, inky stones floated before him, each one glowing faintly with a sinister energy. He cleared his throat. I wasn't expecting you to have any," he managed at last. Old Ghost's hollow eyes gleamed. "We've kept these safe for a long time," he said. "If evolution stones are what you seek, you're welcome to these." Ethan's mind raced. With these stones, he could complete his quest, and perhaps even advance the abilities of the beasts he commanded. He forced himself to appear calm. "Thank you," he said, voice steady. "This will help us both." As he reached out, the ghosts drifted back into the gloom, leaving Ethan alone with the 2 dark stones. In that silent cave, he realized his plans had just taken an unexpected and potentially game-changing turn. Ethan felt the tug before he saw it. The dark crow let out a soft, urgent caw and seized the hem of his trousers with a sharp talon. Its glossy black eyes were fixed on the pair of obsidian stones laid out on the rough-hewn table. Though it didn't understand why, an irresistible longing pulsed through its veins. It needed those stones. With them, the crow could become stronger, far stronger, a profound, irreversible change waiting just beyond reach. Ethan knelt and gently stroked the bird's midnight feathered head. "I know, my friend," he murmured, voice calm and reassuring. "But not yet. You're not ready for them." The crow hesitated, its feathers ruffling as conflicting impulses warred beneath its sleek plumage. Instinct whispered that these dark gems were the key to evolution, that passing their power through its blood would unlock the next stage of its being, a transformation that would crown it with a humanoid crow's head and grant it incredible new abilities. Yet Ethan recognized the danger in rushing such processes. The creature's body and spirit had to be prepared, or the change could destroy it outright. Reluctantly, the dark crow released its grip and settled at Ethan's side. Though desire still gleamed in its onyx gaze, it trusted him completely, and for now, that trust was enough. Ethan gathered the stones and slipped them into his satchel, already planning the day when his companion would be ready to embrace the power within. Now evolution was wasting his extraordinary talents and potential completely. Ethan had never set out to claim any evolution stones from the avaricious spirits. Yet, to his astonishment, the venerable wraiths proved so honorable that a few polite words were all it took to persuade them. Before he knew it, they'd handed him 2 dark stones. Ethan's pulse quickened. Silently, he summoned his onboard scanner and ran each stone through its diagnostics. The first readout flashed: Dark Stone, Intermediate. A polished gem as black as midnight, it could trigger evolution in select Pokémon, and, on top of that, slightly boost a trainer's own abilities. The second was a Dark Stone, Basic, identical in color and shape, but lacking the power to improve qualifications. It would merely induce evolution and nothing more. Ethan couldn't help but recall his previous life's lessons. Evolution stones came in different grades, each with its own effects. An intermediate stone not only advanced a Pokemon's form, but could elevate its innate potential as well. If he applied this dark stone to his Dark Crow, its attributes might climb another notch, perhaps even reaching that coveted dark green tier. With a low, determined smile, he slipped the stones safely into his pack and forged ahead, ready to unlock greater power than ever before. Ethan studied the 2 stones floating before him. If these really were high-level evolution stones, the chance of ever finding one was slim to none, and Dark Crow hadn't even reached the point where it needed to evolve. But the creature's impatient thump against the cavern floor gave away its eagerness. Without hesitation, Ethan slipped both stones into his rocket belt and offered a curt, "Thank you." Old Ghost inclined his head. "You helped us, so we return the favor. These stones are far too potent for our kind, so we gathered them. Otherwise, you'd never have discovered them so quickly." His pale eyes held a cold gleam, confirming Ethan's suspicion that dark stones only benefited elves on the brink of evolution. They were useless to ghostly beings like Old Ghost. No sooner had Old Ghost finished speaking than a viscous black mist seeped from his form, coiling outward like living smoke toward the dumb beast by Ethan's side. The creature let out a startled "Gah!" and Dark Crow's feathers bristled. It was the beast's protector, and he would not stand by if anyone dared harm his companion. Ethan stepped forward and placed his hand between the Dark Crow's talons and the beast's neck, preventing the crow from tightening its grip. He narrowed his eyes, studying the ancient ghost that hovered before him. He couldn't be certain what the spirit was doing, but he suspected it had something to do with teaching the creature the electrocardiogram technique. The beast showed no resistance. It simply stood still under the ghost's influence. Within moments, the black mist that had enveloped the beast dissolved and drifted back toward the specter. In an instant, the shapeless fog reformed into Lao Guisi's familiar, otherworldly figure. A raspy voice, Lao Guisi's, rang inside Ethan's mind. "Well, I've taught him the basics of the electrocardiogram," the ghost said. "His talent is extraordinary, but raw. He lacks a guiding hand." Lao Guisi's tone turned urgent. "I sense untapped power within him, but he hasn't fully mastered it. That's where you come in, human." Ethan nodded. He already knew the beast had potential, but he hadn't realized just how far from mastery it still was. A sense of purpose settled over him. He was to be the creature's mentor. Then, as if seizing the moment, a boyish voice echoed in Ethan's mind. "Master! Master! Master!" Startled, Ethan glanced down at the beast. Its eyes now glowed with a soft blue light, and it was clearly speaking, telepathically, for the first time. The voice was young, eager, and unmistakably its own. "I can speak," the creature thought, wonder infusing its words. Ethan offered it a reassuring smile. "Yes, and together, we're going to unlock your full power." Ethan held his breath as he faced the creature before him. "Is that you, a beast?" he asked softly. The animal, a stocky, slow-moving creature with smooth, pale pink skin, nodded but offered no telepathic reply. Ethan reminded himself that this was only their first attempt. He couldn't expect fluency overnight. He reached out and gently stroked its broad forehead, smiling reassuringly. "It's okay. We'll take it one step at a time. You'll learn to use this gift." A gentle resonated in his mind. By human standards, the sound might have been a sweet, almost feminine murmur. At the same moment, the elves of the Dark Crow standing nearby felt the same tone drift into their thoughts. True to their lineage, they didn't need psychic bonds to converse, but even they couldn't deny the wonder of this link. The Dark Crow turned to examine the drowsy creature with amused curiosity. It was hard not to grin at how enthusiastically Ethan was embracing his new power. After all, telepathy wasn't about mastering an alien tongue. It was pure spiritual communion. The mind simply translated the creature's intent into sounds each listener understood. Underneath, there were no words, only shared thoughts. And with that, their impromptu lesson drew to a close. Ethan's grin widened. His first telepathic exchange had gone better than he could have hoped. Ethan's most prized acquisition was Kira's elven egg. It showed no signs of hatching yet, but its very survival proved it wasn't dead. Somehow there must be a way to awaken it, even if no one has uncovered it so far. His second haul consisted of 10 vials of geosperm, an extraordinary asset that, if the great kingdoms ever learned of it, would surely draw covetous eyes. And as a final surprise, he found 2 dark stones, an entirely unexpected bonus to an already lucrative prize. Chapter 58. The Ghostly Reward. After the ancient specters guided him through the winding labyrinthine tunnels, Ethan noticed a surprising change in the spirits and creatures they passed. Their hostile stares had softened, even warmed into what seemed like genuine goodwill. At last, they came to the mouth of a larger cavern, where the elder ghosts halted. Ethan exchanged a perplexed glance with his guides. Weren't they meant to lead him out of this maze? Why had they stopped, here of all places, where so many more ghosts gathered? Before he could voice his question, the eldest wraith stepped forward, its form flickering in the faint glow of bioluminescent moss. "You have done us a great service," it intoned, its hollow voice echoing off the damp rock. "It is time we honored our promise." With a graceful gesture, the ghost drifted into the cavern, beckoning Ethan to follow. He hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. Almost at once, dozens of spirits converged around him, some hovering in midair, others clinging to the walls, each face alight with curiosity and expectation. Ethan's pulse quickened. Though these ghosts had been his allies and had guarded him fiercely, they now moved with the precision of a hunting pack, herding him forward. The sensation of being corralled like prey sent a chill through him. He forced himself to stay calm and scanned the silent crowd. What reward had they in store for him? And would it truly keep their promise, or prove yet another test of his courage? Ethan stood in the vast, torchlit chamber, surrounded by elves whose graceful forms flickered in the wavering light. Before him, the venerable Lao Guisi, whose true name, long ago, had been Zheng Jinsu, spoke at last. "Here," the old elf announced, extending a hand toward the waiting clan members, "are those of our kind who volunteered to journey with you. Choose one, and he or she will become your elven companion." Ethan stared, his mouth going dry. A companion? After everything he'd been through, this was his reward? He glanced at the elves arrayed before him, tall and lithe, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. "An ally," Lao Guisi corrected gently, as though reading his thoughts. "A guide, a protector in the days ahead." Ethan swallowed. The notion still felt surreal, but for Lao Guisi, the offer made perfect sense. Centuries ago, when the elf was still young and known by his birth name, he had crossed into the human world and bonded with a mortal friend. Back then, human life teetered on the edge of collapse. War, famine, plague all ravaged their lands. Despite his courage, that human companion had perished too soon, and Zheng Jinsui had returned home, his heart broken. Time, however, had gradually healed old wounds. From afar, Lao Guisi watched as humanity rebuilt itself, mastering arts and forging cities more wondrous than any elf had known. He saw, too, that humans and elves once thrived together, human innovation shoring up elven vulnerabilities, and elven magic in turn accelerating the growth of wild elf clans. Their alliance had been a beacon of hope in desperate times. Now, as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, threats that would demand all their strength, Lao Guisi was determined to reignite that ancient bond. By letting Ethan choose his companion, he sought to forge not just a partnership between two individuals, but a renewed covenant between their two peoples. Ethan's gaze drifted over them. A silver-haired huntress, her eyes calm as starlight. A young swordsman, confidence radiating from every movement. An older archer, whose measured quiet hinted at unspoken wisdom. Each carried the promise of power and the risk of unknown trials. He drew in a steadying breath. The path he chose now would shape both his destiny and that of the elves. There was no turning back. With resolve, Ethan stepped forward to make his choice. Ethan had always lived here in the ghost realm as if it were nothing more than a quiet backwater, an endless expanse of mist, ruins, and drifting spirits. He understood better than anyone that nothing remarkable ever happened in this place. There were no rare specters, no record of ghosts evolving even with the aid of a ghost stone, and the legendary final form, Gengar, was spoken of only in hushed legends. For as long as the local ghosts could remember, they joked about sending one of their number to the human world, hoping a bond with a human trainer might grant them extraordinary power. When the restless Gengar first materialized near their settlement, it seized the opportunity. It would find a human, entice them, and grow strong. Then Ethan arrived, and immediately, Gengar took a liking to him. Word spread like wildfire through the younger specters. They'd listened all their lives to the tales spun by the elders, stories of bustling cities, of trainers and their Pokémon, of battles and evolution. They'd never laid eyes on a real human before, and when Ethan stepped through the shimmering veil, their curiosity exploded. Pale hands pressed against invisible barriers, hollow eyes followed his every move. Ethan, despite the hushed cheers of the ghosts, felt a twinge of uncertainty. He hadn't come here planning to pick a ghostly partner. Pokémon of the spectral variety were known for mischief, for slipping through walls at will, or worse, echoing the antics of Team Rocket in some warped otherworldly past life. And yet, as Gengar drifted forward, its grin widening, Ethan realized he stood at a crossroads. In this silent realm of spirits, a single choice could change everything. For him, for the ghosts who'd waited so long, and perhaps even for Gengar itself, on its path to that ultimate, elusive evolution. Ethan's new partner might just be a ghastly, a little spectral blob that most people would dismiss as underwhelming, but that didn't faze him one bit. In fact, he and Ghastly both seemed excited at the thought of its final evolution, Gengar. For one thing, Gengar boasts some of the highest special attack and speed stats around, perfectly in line with Ethan's preferred battle style. And because it's both a ghost and poison type, it brings a wealth of strategic versatility. Under the right commands, it can turn what looks like a disadvantageous matchup into a winning one. But the real joke's on anyone who underestimates Gengar's Mega evolution. Once it Mega evolves, it practically becomes a special attack turret, unleashing damage so fierce that opponents scarcely know what hit them. Right now, Ethan relies on his bulkier Pokémon to keep him safe, but if he ever ventures into certain human-only zones, he's not allowed to bring his Pokémon along. In a sudden ambush, he might not even have time to throw a Pokéball. A ghost type changes everything. Ghastly can slip into Ethan's shadow realm and stand guard without drawing unwanted attention, ready to protect him anywhere, anytime, against all manner of threats. When the veteran trainer announced that Ethan had chosen a ghost-type partner, several onlookers were genuinely taken aback. Yet Ethan just smiled, confident that sometimes the most overlooked allies turn out to be the most powerful. Ethan slipped into the cavern and found himself surrounded by flickering apparitions. At first, he'd come in hoping to claim a single, powerful spirit to bind into an elite elf, something rare enough to justify the risk. But as more and more wraiths drifted into view, he realized that isolating and conquering just one would be dangerously complicated. Worse still, capturing a ghost here would leave him with a creature far harder to control than he'd ever anticipated. Then he remembered the legendary Old Wraith said to haunt these depths, and its promised reward perfectly matched what he was looking for. Seizing on that opportunity, Ethan made his decision. Any spirit that met his strict criteria would be claimed on the spot. If a ghost couldn't reach his standards, he'd let it be. Resources were too scarce for him to waste on half-trained familiars. Ethan had always followed an elite path, fewer recruits, but each one strong enough to stand on its own. Training half a dozen true warriors was better than raising dozens of mediocre minions. Still, he couldn't shake a twinge of guilt. He felt as though he was taking advantage of these restless souls. Yet to his surprise, the spirits he claimed seemed almost eager to serve. With that uneasy thought at the back of his mind, Ethan began his ritual, ready to bind his next elite companion. Chapter 7. The Ghost Selection. This was the first time since Ethan's rebirth that he felt a twinge of awkwardness at the elves' display. He offered a polite nod to Lao Gisi, who answered with a curious tilt of his head. For most trainers, choosing a ghost partner from hundreds of candidates would be a daunting task. But Ethan had the advantage of his implanted chip. He simply flicked his gaze across the crowd, and digital overlays sprang to life before his eyes. In his previous life, nearly every ghost he'd encountered had boasted top-tier ratings, predominantly red, a few orange, and at worst, a pale yellow. Now, however, every candidate before him hovered at mid to low qualifications, none even reaching a solid yellow rank. A frown creased Ethan's forehead. If this entire enclave was populated by such mediocre specters, there was no point in capturing any of them for cultivation, a waste of precious resources. Lao Guisi noticed Ethan's displeasure and raised an eyebrow. Not what you expected? Nobody catching your eye? Ethan forced a calm smile. I thought I'd see more variety. He swept his gaze back over the throng. Though the ghosts swarmed in great numbers, nearly half of them shared those underwhelming stats he had just scanned. He hadn't even needed to examine each one individually to recognize the pattern. Lao Guisi chuckled lightly. Quantity doesn't always mean quality, but don't write them off just yet. Sometimes the best partners come from the most unexpected places. Ethan drew a steadying breath, smoothing out his nerves. He would give these ghosts a closer look. After all, every soul had its hidden potential. With renewed resolve, he prepared to begin his detailed scans, determined to find the perfect companion among this sea of specters. Chapter 59, Conquering Ghosts, 23. Chi Wenyan offered a quiet nod, and Ethan returned it. He was about to turn away. His dark crow and the foolish beast flitted at his sides, but nothing in this cave met his criteria. Truly rare ghosts always seemed to appear somewhere else, and he had no particular regrets about leaving. As Ethan began to step forward, Master Lao Guisi hesitated. He drew a steadying breath, then called out into the shadows beyond the torchlight. Wait, there are still a few who haven't arrived. Ethan froze and nodded, willing to hold back for just a moment. After a brief silence, figures drifted from the cavern's depths. A small group of ghosts appeared, gliding toward them on currents of violet mist. The instant Ethan laid eyes on these newcomers, his expression brightened. From their posture and the shimmering aura that surrounded them, he could tell they were unlike any specters he'd encountered so far. Their eyes bore a curious, almost divine intelligence, and the purple energy coalescing around their forms was thicker, more substantial. One spirit, a slender female shape, wore a wide, ecstatic grin, her translucent features alight with eagerness. Ethan produced his scanning chip, and data streamed across its interface. Rarity levels, power classifications, resonance potentials. A thrill ran through him. At last, he'd found exactly the kind of ghosts he'd been hunting. Ethan watched the data overlays flicker into life before him. Yellow, yellow, dark yellow, yellow, pale green, dark green. With each label, he silently cataloged the ghost's aptitude, and his amazement grew until he reached the final reading, dark green. A translucent panel materialized, detailing the ghost's stats. Name Spectre, quality dark green, gender male, level 10, type ghost poison, ability levitation, held item none, inherited skills flame fist, phantom visage, black mist basic moves, hypnosis, tongue lashing, curse, black gaze. Teachables, sleep, shadow ball, psychic, skill swap, snore egg, moves none. The elderly spirit elder studied Ethan intently, then fixed his gaze on Spectre with a bittersweet smile. You can clearly assess their abilities, he said. This one, he gestured at the ghost, has the greatest potential in our entire clan. He was to be our crown jewel, the one I'd trained to succeed me as patriarch when my time came. Ethan blinked in surprise. He'd known the tribe's ghosts all bore markings of talent, but he hadn't expected to find one destined for leadership hidden among them. And yet here it was, its dark green rating a clear signal of its extraordinary promise. Ethan blinked in surprise. The spirit before him wasn't especially powerful. Its cultivation rank was fairly low, yet it had mastered an unusually long list of techniques. Was this the result of innate talent sharpened by secret training? The spirit, who'd been staring at Ethan from the edge of the summoning circle, finally registered Ethan's gaze. Its pale eyes widened. It had never seen a human so close before. All the tales the old patriarch had woven about the human realm had filled it with longing. It had dreamed of this moment ever since it first heard humans might exist here. Back then, it had been so eager to manifest itself that the patriarch had had to restrain it, and now, inexplicably, and almost against its will, it had been drawn here, at last face to face with the very beings it had imagined. "I've made my choice," Ethan announced, voice calm and certain. He stepped forward and pointed at the spirit. "This one's mine. I'm convinced he has the greatest potential." The old patriarch, Patriarch Lau, smiled wryly. He hesitated, torn. After all, Ethan was the one who had requested these exceptional recruits. How could he refuse Ethan's pick? And yet, he'd hoped Ethan would show mercy to some of the others. "Very well," Patriarch Lau said at last, his tone measured but heavy with regret. "It shall be as you wish." His two words hung in the air like a whisper of mourning, and for the briefest instant Ethan saw the grief flicker in the old man's eyes, an unspoken sorrow for the choices they'd made and the paths they now walked. Ethan stepped forward, smiling warmly. "How about coming with me? Let's go explore this vast, colorful world out there." A raspy chuckle escaped the ghost. It hesitated for a moment, then glanced back at its trainer without protest and nodded excitedly. Ethan's grin grew wider. He reached for an Ultra Ball on his belt and held it out. "If you're ready, hop on in." The dark crow and the silly-looking beast watched with bright, eager eyes. They knew a new companion was about to join their ranks, and they couldn't help sharing in the excitement. Under their expectant gazes, the ghost floated closer to the Ultra Ball. Tentatively, it pressed against the ball's button, and in an instant a crimson light enveloped it. With a soft thud, the ghost was drawn inside. There was no struggle. The capture was clean and complete. Ethan let out a satisfied breath. Snaring such a powerful, well-trained ghost had been an unexpected triumph, and now, he thought with relief, he'd never have to worry about it turning on him again. Ethan watched as the clan's most honored scion lay subdued at his feet. Across from him, Lao Guisi's face was etched with anguish, but the elder had steeled himself. For the sake of the tribe's future, he would stand by his choice. No amount of regret would change what had to be done. With a heavy sigh, Lao Guisi released the spectral figure he had just captured. Ethan stepped forward and addressed the newly freed ghost. "Welcome to our ranks. I look forward to your counsel." A single, playful quack echoed through the cavern. Behind Ethan, the dark raven and the foolish beast joined in, their laughter, "Yeah! Yeah!" ringing out like cheers. From the back of the group, Haggis, the oldest of these creatures, though still bursting with youthful energy, darted around Ethan and the dark raven, his excitement almost palpable. Ethan smiled, certain that such liveliness would breathe new vigor into their company. Lao Guisi offered a tight, gracious nod. Though his heart weighed heavy, he concealed his distress beneath a mask of generosity. Seeing the elder finally relax, Ethan allowed himself a moment's relief. At last, the ritual of subjugation complete, Lao Guisi guided Ethan toward the cavern's entrance. As they emerged into the open air, sunlight bathed Ethan in warmth. He closed his eyes and savored it, feeling the sun's gentle heat on his skin, a balm to his spirit after the damp chill of the cave. Ethan straightened, his spine cracking convincingly as he prepared to part ways with the elder specter. He glanced back at the cavern's entrance, where the ancient ghost lingered in the dim corner, clearly averse to the sunlight creeping in. Spirits may not fear the sun, but this one certainly disliked its warmth. "Old ghost," Ethan said with a reassuring smile, "slip into my shadow for now." Though he had only just subdued the spirit, Ethan's confidence in it was absolute. The ghost inclined its head in solemn agreement, merging effortlessly into the dark silhouette at Ethan's feet. To the spirit, the shadow felt almost as comforting as the cold, humid depths of the underworld. Cramped, yes, but familiar. Ethan, for his part, made no move to imprison the ghost within his elven orb. He knew that, in the days to come, this specter would serve as his constant guardian. Better to let it learn its place before binding it more tightly. With a final nod, Ethan turned and strode forward into the light, the shaded figure faithfully trailing behind him. Ethan leaned against the cavern wall, staring at the faint glow still pulsing from the stone pillar. Sooner or later, he'd have to return home, and it was precisely this enchanted monument that made the journey worthwhile. Now that he'd driven away the restless spirits haunting the cave, there was no reason to linger. A triumphant homecoming awaited him, and he could already picture the astonished faces in his village when he strode back through its gates. Chapter 2, coming soon. If you enjoyed this chapter, please bookmark and recommend it. Fellow trainers, let's band together and capture those elves. Chapter 60, Arcane Skill, Teleportation, Part 3. Laoguisi lingered at the cavern's mouth long after Ethan and the dumb beasts had departed. He stood there in silence, a heavy sigh escaping him before he turned and retraced his steps into the gloom. The emptiness of the cave swallowed him, and in that solitude, he felt a twinge of loneliness. Not far away, deeper in the winding tunnels, Ethan paused beneath a twisted pale tree. 3 bizarre creatures, those so-called dumb beasts, gathered around him. Their mottled hides shimmered in the dim light, each creature's eyes reflecting a dull, unspoken intelligence. Ethan reached out and laid a gentle hand on the nearest beast's flank. He spoke softly, a warm smile on his face. "All right, my friends," he said. "Let's use your momentary shift to get us moving. Just enough to cover ground, no need to overexert yourselves. I'd like to arrive in fighting shape." He knew full well that they couldn't teleport the full distance in one leap. The rocket base lay at least 3 days' journey from here, and pushing the beasts too far in a single jump would sap their strength, and his. Fortunately, he'd already calculated carefully how much energy each jump would require. Otherwise, he might have found himself anxiously racing against time, training frantically along the road. As it was, Ethan remained composed and confident. Momentary shift was, after all, an immensely practical field skill. The dumb beasts exchanged silent glances. Their telekinetic prowess was still somewhat unrefined. They couldn't articulate words, but they understood Ethan's intent. One by one, they gave small, deliberate nods. Then, almost instinctively, their forms began to blur at the edges. Ethereal motes of energy crackled around them, enveloping Ethan in a gentle cocoon of power. Even the wraith-like shadows that clung to Ethan's heels seemed drawn into the swirl of arcane force, as though eager to share in the journey. In an instant, the world around them warped and stretched. The cavern walls, the twisting roots overhead, the damp earth beneath their feet, all dissolved into a rush of light and sensation, and then they were gone, bound for the unknown miles ahead. Haggis emerged from Ethan's shadow with cautious curiosity, the first time the hulking brute had ventured so far from his master's side. Ghost and Dark Raven, the 2 elven guardians, turned toward him with mild surprise, but Haggis paid them no heed. His amber eyes were fixed on the shimmering runes that marked their destination. He was silently calculating the precise coordinates for the jump. Channeling every ounce of his augmented power, Ethan drew a ring of crackling light around the assembled beasts. Their eyes shone brighter under the surge of energy. Then, like ripples on a pond, the glow expanded, enveloping them all. In an instant, the forest clearing where they stood vanished. Only a single leaf drifted down through empty air before the world snapped back into focus. Thud! They landed in a dense, unfamiliar woodland. Tall pines and tangled underbrush enclosed them on all sides. Trial Island. Ethan staggered, the aftershocks of the spatial shift rattling his senses. Even with his enhanced physique, the sudden relocation made his head spin. Dark Raven and Ghost, however, remained utterly still, their elven reflexes undisturbed by the teleportation. A few of the larger beasts, less stable during the transition, had floated awkwardly for a heartbeat too long, and now lay scattered on the forest floor, groaning as they struggled to regain their footing. Their minds seemed dazed, spirits dulled by the jolt. Ethan straightened, brushing dirt from his cloak. Around him, the island's shadows stirred, as if acknowledging their arrival. Despite the beast's sluggishness, he felt a thrill of anticipation. Trial Island was no ordinary destination, and the real challenge was just beginning. Ethan felt the warning pulse through his mind just in time. Whatever had happened to his companion was only a minor psychic flare-up, not a full break. Own. He shook his head and growled, "You stubborn fool, just meditate first." He studied the beast before him. It was exhausted, every muscle slack, yet still alive. Though Ethan hadn't quite pinned down their exact location, the creature's wariness told him they'd put good distance between themselves and the dreaded Gizi cavern. The beast gave a slow nod, then forced itself to rise. With the last of its strength, it handed over the incubator it had been protecting and collapsed to the ground, magical energy rippling from its form as it slipped into meditation. Ethan knelt and cradled the incubator in his arms. The beast was right. No matter where they were, they needed to be ready. The elven scouts trusted him, and he would not betray that trust. "Shadow crows, specters," he called, rising to his feet. "Circle the perimeter. If any elves approach, attack without hesitation." From the treetops, a trio of dark-feathered crows took flight with sharp, warning caws. On the ground, two shimmering specters coalesced, their ghostly forms drifting into position. Even the newest specter recruit, a pale, flickering wraith, focused intently on the shadows beyond the camp, its eyes glowing with diligence. Ethan exhaled. With his summoned guardians on watch and the incubator safely in his grasp, he allowed himself a moment's relief. Now all that remained was to wait and to hope the beast's rest would last long enough for whatever lay ahead. Ethan pressed himself against the rough bark of a towering oak, its thick canopy blotting out most of the pale moonlight. He lowered his voice to a hush. "Ghost, slip through the shadows and scout our surroundings. Watch for powerful elves, but stay hidden and under no circumstances engage." His spectral companion gave a soft, eager chuckle. Though it was Ghost's first time beyond the veil, he seemed to understand the need for caution. With a subtle nod, he vanished into the forest's plentiful darkness, weaving through the shadows like a living wraith. Ethan shook dust from his cloak and settled cross-legged beside his mute beast, a large, silent guardian whose watchful stance never wavered. Above them, the dark raven circled in the night air, its obsidian wings cutting through shafts of moonlight as its keen eyes probed the treetops. Drawing the incubator from his pack, Ethan placed it on his lap and studied its holographic display. Inside lay Kira's elven eggs, their translucent shells faintly pulsing. Every vital sign registered exceptionally, some readings even exceeded standard elven thresholds. Yet the gestation timer remained stubbornly blank. The incubator's advanced AI delivered a chilling verdict. Under all detectable parameters, these eggs could not hatch. A knot of frustration tightened in Ethan's chest. He closed his eyes for a moment, forcing his thoughts ahead. With Ghost scouting in shadow, the raven keeping watch above, and the forest cloaked in darkness around them, he knew the answer to this mystery lay somewhere under those boughs, if he could only unravel it before time ran out. Ethan offered a wry smile as he stared at the elven egg cradled in his palm. "How am I even supposed to hatch you? This is going to be a real headache." Time slipped by until the sun dipped low in the western sky. At last, Greasy materialized at Ethan's side, molding the ethereal gases of his form into shifting silhouettes. With each new shape, the ghostly figure conveyed which elves in the region were exceptionally strong and which possessed rare, unusual gifts. When Greasy fell silent, Ethan finally grasped their location. "We're already inside the flying mantis territory," he muttered. No wonder that mountain beast was utterly spent. He scanned the surrounding undergrowth and realized they were standing on the very fringes of the mantis's domain. A few more strides would take them beyond it, and explain why, until now, they'd encountered no formidable elves. The flying mantises were a clan few dared to challenge. Defeat one, and an even stronger warrior would appear. Lose, and the entire swore, Mem would descend in vengeance. Ethan watched the sky mantis retreat into the treetops. Here, if you lost a duel, you were forced to face an even weaker mantis, over and over, until your combat ability was completely spent. The thought of such a cruel, endless cycle made even the fiercest wild elves tremble. Ethan, by contrast, felt a measure of relief. The sky mantis was the apex predator in this forest. If he had to face one, he knew he could disengage safely. The base lay less than a day's journey away. If he pushed himself and his mount, he could arrive by nightfall. Better still, once his sluggish steed had fully recovered its strength, Ethan could employ his teleportation skill again and slash the travel time drastically. As the sun climbed overhead, his dull-haired mount stirred and shook off its lethargy. Ethan flexed his arms, feeling the familiar surge of energy at his fingertips. Every use of his instantaneous movement drained a huge chunk of his superpower reserves, but each jump extended his reach by leaps and bounds. The first time he'd overdrawn and still managed to teleport more than 10 kilometers. This time, his displacement topped 100 kilometers, a nearly tenfold improvement. With that kind of progress, he might well dash to the base and be back in the fight before anyone could stop him. More importantly, after activating instant mobility this time, I still had surplus energy, enough to handle any sudden twist. It wouldn't always be this generous, but it was proof that my grasp of the skill had deepened. The beast's eyes fluttered open, glowing brighter and sharper than before. That light in its gaze told me it had absorbed a hefty shock from my attack. "All right, you stubborn brute," I called out. "How does that feel?" For a heartbeat, I thought it might collapse under the aftershocks, but then its posture straightened, its glare unbroken. Seeing that steady fire in its eyes, I felt the last of my tension slip away.